Hearing of the Public Accountability Committee inquiry into the impact of the WestConnex project. Before I commence, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people who are the traditional custodians of this land. I'd also like to pay respect to the elders, past and present of the Eora Nation, and extend that respect to other Aboriginals who may be present. Today we will hear from the government departments and agencies, including the Department of Planning and Environment and Infrastructure New South Wales, the Audit Office of New South Wales, Dr. Raymond Nasser, the Transport Workers Union, and a number of community and resident groups. Before we commence, I'd like to make some brief comments about the procedures for today's hearing. Today's hearing is open to the public and has been broadcast live via the Department's website. A transcript of today's hearing will be placed on the committee's website when it becomes available. In accordance with broadcasting guidelines, while members of the media may film or record, committee members, witnesses, people in the public gallery should not be the primary focus of any filming or photography. I'd like to remind media representatives that you must take responsibility what you publish about the committee's proceedings. It's important to remember that parliamentary privilege does not apply to what witnesses may say outside of their evidence at the hearing. And so I urge witnesses to be careful about any comments you may make to the media or to others after you complete your evidence, as such comments would not be protected by parliamentary privilege if another person decided to take an action for defamation. The guidelines for the broadcast proceedings are available from the Secretariat. There may be some question that the witness could only answer if they had more time or with certain documents to hand. In these circumstances, witnesses are advised that they can take a question on notice and provide an answer within 21 days. I remind everyone here today that committee hearings are not intended to provide a forum for people to make adverse reflections about others under protection of public privilege, but therefore request that witnesses focus on issues raised by the inquiry terms of reference and avoid naming individuals unnecessarily. Witnesses are advised any messages should be delivered to the committee members through the committee staff. To aid the audibility of this hearing, may I remind both committee members and witnesses to speak directly into the microphones. In addition, several seats have been reserved near the loudspeakers for persons in the public gallery who have hearing difficulties. Could everyone please turn their mobile phones to silent for the duration of this hearing? Finally, I welcome the many people in the public gallery today. May I remind everyone in the audience that this hearing is not an open forum for comment from the floor. Audience interruptions can make it difficult for witnesses to communicate with the committee and for Hansard to record the proceedings of the hearing. I now welcome our first witnesses from the Department of Planning and Environment. Could each witness, starting from my left, please state their name and position title and swear either an oath or affirmation. The cards are available on the table in front of you.
Thank you, Chair. My name's Marcus Ray. I'm the Deputy Secretary for Planning Services within the Department of Planning and Environment. And I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
My name is Glenn Snow. I'm the Director of Transport Assessments at the Department of Planning and Environment. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Do either the witnesses wish to make a short opening statement?
Mr. Chair, I would like to take advantage of that. So thank you very much for inviting us here today to speak at the inquiry. And I would like to just summarise the department's role in relation to WestConnex. And as I said, I'm the Deputy Secretary Planning Services, and Glenn Snow is the Director for Transport Assessments. My experience includes almost 25 years in the New South Wales Government, and before that I was in the private sector. I've held various positions in the Department of Planning and Environment and have led the Planning Services Division over the last 4 years. Glenn has 20 years experience in government in strategic and statutory planning, major projects assessment, environmental impact assessment, and has qualifications in construction management, urban and regional planning. The role of the division includes, among other matters, the assessment of state significant infrastructure proposals under the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. The Transport Assessment Team within the division is responsible for independently assessing the impacts and benefits of transport projects, including WestConnex, and providing advice and recommendations to assist the Minister for Planning. These independent and rigorous assessments are consistent with that undertaken for private sector developments as well. Both Glenn and I were employed by the department at the time of the assessment and determination of all 5 WestConnex proposals. The M4 widening was approved by the then Minister on 12 December 2014, followed by the approval for the King George's Road intersection upgrade on the 3rd of March the following year. The M4 East was approved by the then Minister for Planning on the 11th of February 2016 and the new M5 on the 20th of April that year. The final stage of WestConnex, the M4-M5 link, was approved on the 17th of April 2018 by the current Minister for Planning. The department undertook a detailed assessment of the 5 applications in accordance with the relevant legislation and planning instruments, including the provisions of the legislation, Part 5(2) of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. A summary of the department's role includes issuing secretaries' requirements for the preparation of the impact statements, conducting reviews of the environmental impact statements in consultation with agencies to make sure they address those requirements, exhibiting those impact statements and inviting submissions, carefully reviewing those environmental impact statements, public and government submissions and the applicant's response to submissions, commissioning and considering input from independent experts on key issues of traffic, noise, air quality, groundwater, urban design, and undertaking a detailed assessment of each project in consultation with key government agencies such as the Environment Protection Authority, the Office of Environment and Heritage, the Department of Industry, the Heritage Council, the Office of the Chief Scientist and Engineer, and carefully considering all submissions raised. The department also undertakes comprehensive community consultation through the exhibition of the environmental impact statement, including participation in direct consultation activities and meetings with community members and groups. The public exhibition periods for each project exceeded the statutory requirements and reflect the complexity of the projects. The environmental impact statements are publicly notified in state and local newspapers and can be viewed online at local libraries and council offices. Through each of the assessments, there are a number of common benefits identified with the project: regional traffic improvements, including road safety improvements, travel time savings, improved connectivity between Parramatta and the inner west, Sydney and Sydney's southwest suburbs, improved access to and reliability of the motorway network, enabling more efficient freight movements, facilitation of opportunities for future urban renewal in precincts adjoining the projects, and delivery of new and upgraded pedestrian and cycling infrastructure. The department's assessments also clearly acknowledge that the projects would have a high level of impact on acoustic and visual amenity and traffic, particularly during construction, and this would be particular to some local areas. The assessments acknowledge that construction would require the acquisition of residential properties, businesses and open space, and the greatest impact would be at Haberfield and Ashfield, where over 50 residences would need to be acquired. And this would affect both heritage fabric of the conservation area and social cohesion in the suburb. The 3 larger projects, the M4 East, M5 and M4-M5 link, require the construction and operation of air ventilation facilities to exhaust the tunnel emissions. The air quality assessments undertaken for each project predicted the air quality outcomes would be acceptable, with only minor impacts occurring in a limited number of locations, and improvements in roadside level air quality at other locations due to the shift in traffic from surface roads to the tunnels. Although each of the projects have social environmental impacts, the department's assessments determined that on balance the benefits of each project outweighed the impacts. However, to minimise the impact of the projects, the approvals require a large number of conditions relating to noise and vibration mitigation, traffic management, visual amenity, hydrology and subsidence for both construction and operation, as well as the management of heritage issues, biodiversity, dust nuisance, contamination and complaints during construction. requirements for urban design and landscaping and community cohesion, the management of residual land post-construction are also included. The tunnel proposals also include strict and transparent air quality provisions, which have been informed by advice provided by the Independent Advisory Committee on Air Tunnel Quality, which is chaired by the Chief Scientist and Engineer. Through its ongoing assessment of the WestConnex projects, the Department has incorporated additional requirements for the protection of community amenity. In particular, enhanced protections have been required for spoil and truck management and in relation to construction fatigue for those members of the community that will have exposure to consecutive project impacts. To address impacts associated with construction fatigue, particularly in Haberfield and Ashfield, the infrastructure approval for the M4-M5 link requires the implementation of a construction noise insulation program, the appointment of an independent acoustics advisor, coordination of utility works to ensure respite is provided during construction, and the appointment of a utility coordination manager. The Department has established an infrastructure management team charged with the responsibility for regulating the post-approval requirements of the projects and monitoring compliance with conditions. It does this through a review of post-approval documentation, site inspections, consultation with the Environment Protection Authority and relevant councils, responding to correspondence from community members and complaints, and monitoring the WestConnex website to ensure Roads and Maritime Services is uploading the correct, up-to-date reports, plans and relevant documents to ensure the community has access to all the project information. The Department has also enhanced its compliance team, which ensures conditions of approval are correctly applied and that any alleged non-compliances are fully investigated. A Principal Compliance Officer was appointed in July 2016 for the WestConnex program of works. Since then, 2 further officers have been appointed who undertake regular inspections, review compliance, attend community meetings and identify areas for improvement.
Point of order, Chair. Can I please ask how much further this statement has to go? Because I was wondering if we could get the statement tabled. We have limited time, and if we could get on to questions, please.
Could I just say I will be about 30 seconds more?
30 seconds.
So, the 3 compliance officers are based part-time at the Inner West Council and respond to all compliance-related matters as well as any council-raised issues. The officers manage multiple sites through a number of channels, and they coordinate activities with the Environment Protection Authority, directing the environmental representatives for the projects to review construction activities and sites. The compliance team also engages in monthly meetings with other regulatory agencies, including Safe Work, New South Wales Health, to ensure a coordinated approach to compliance issues. Since March 2017, the Department has issued 3 penalty notices to subcontractors for the use of local roads contrary to the approval and 33 official cautions in relation to other non-compliances. The cautions have been issued in lieu of penalty notices where no significant environmental impact has occurred as a result of the non-compliance and because the contractors and agencies actively worked with the Department to implement measures to ensure the breaches are not repeated. In addition, 5 directions have been issued, including one requiring one requiring the review of mitigation measures
That's about 60 seconds.
Manage odours at St Peters Interchange. To do so, we worked with the Environment Protection Authority. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Do you mind
Thank
tabling
you.
your statement,
Yes,
Mr. Ray?
We'll table the document as well.
Copies of it. That'll be much appreciated.
As with
And thank you,
Mr. Ricky.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for coming along.
Mr. Domney?
Colleague will be asking questions as well. Thank you for coming along this morning. In the early public statements of the government and indeed publicity that's in the public domain, the Sydney Gateway was described as part of the WestConnex project. You would agree with that?
From the Department's point of view, the Department has issued environmental assessment requirements for the Sydney Gateway project, but the Department has not yet seen an environmental impact statement for the project.
That wasn't my question. My question was, because you've described your continuity and your long service in your role here, that with respect to the early announcement, the original announcements, with respect to WestConnex, the Sydney Gateway was part of the description of what WestConnex would be.
Look, that was my recollection at the time.
That's your recollection. Now, in regard to that, were there or have you been involved in discussions going back to the early time with either representatives of Transport for New South Wales or the Sydney Motor Corporation, as it then existed, or other government bodies or agencies about the matter of the Sydney Gateway project? In other words, was the Department of Planning and Environment having discussions back then at that time over at least this aspect of the WestConnex project?
So there have been discussions between officers of the department and those agencies about the Sydney Gateway project.
And in terms of those discussions, can you give us just a summary of what your recollection? Well, first of all, were you involved in those discussions as a senior?
I have been involved in some of those discussions.
Yes. And in those discussions going back then, can you give us a summary of what got discussed in terms of the Sydney Gateway project being an articulated part of the WestConnex project?
Well, I did have. There was one briefing where there was a discussion about what could be the proposals.
Ask you, who was at that briefing?
I think there were a range of. People. There were people from RMS,
And who were they?
That was some time ago. I would
take it on notice.
I would
if
have
you
to
want
take. I would have to take that. On
Okay,
notice.
well, the specific names you could take on notice, but there was yourself, there was RMS, who else was there?
There was someone from Sydney Motorway Corporation.
Yes, Mr. Klanish, Dennis Klanish?
Yes, I think Dennis was there.
Yes. So was this a series of meetings or a single meeting or?
I only recall one meeting.
And do you have a recollection of what got discussed and considered at that meeting?
It was a briefing in relation to progress with developing what might be the project for Sydney Gateway.
As part of the WestConnex project?
At that time, yes, it was.
Right.
When was it, by the way?
I think this may have been. I think I would have to check. Could I take that on
you
notice?
can take that specifics on
probably around about 2016. But I would have to take that on notice.
2016.
2016, but it was still being discussed as part of the WestConnex project.
It was it was still being discussed as part of the WestConnex project.
So you said there was a single briefing that you were in attendance with other senior representatives from other bodies and organisations, some government agencies. What happened after that? Did it just stop the actual further discussions about the Sydney Gateway project as part of WestConnex? In other words, there was a meeting, but then there was no further meetings?
Well, I did not attend another. Look, so I can't answer that question in those terms. I did not attend another meeting in which the Sydney Gateway was discussed.
Would there have been other senior representatives from the department that may have attended meetings to discuss?
There could have been.
Right. How would we get to be able to establish that? Because it's a very important point, this issue of the Sydney Gateway and WestConnex. How would we be able to establish the further meetings that took place after that 2016 meeting that you attended? Is that something that you would have records of in the department?
Oh, yes, we would have records of in the department.
Well, on notice, would you be able to give us fine detail of subsequent meetings to the one you attended yourself, where there was discussion in regard to the Sydney Gateway project connected to the WestConnex as an overall project?
Yes.
Can I just move on then, because time is limited? With respect to the Sydney Gateway project now, which is being developed, as is out there in the public domain described, can you please explain to us what is now the assessment project in some detail that has to be gone through for its approval?
Assessment process.
Process, I apologise.
So the assessment process is the same for all similar projects. It's a state significant infrastructure assessment. So the environmental, as I said before, the environmental assessment requirements have been issued.
Sorry, not for Gateway. They haven't.
Oh, not for Gateway, sorry.
No, that's okay.
So the environmental assessment requirements will have to be issued. So they haven't been applied for at this particular point in time.
No application's been made.
So no early application to receive environmental assessment requirements, which provides the format for the preparation of the environmental impact statement.
So just to pause you there, just to go back, this is being pursued as a state significant development, firstly.
Yes.
That's correct?
Yes.
And as a result, the consent authority is the minister.
Yes.
And under which section of the act?
I think it's 5.2 of part 5.2 of the environmental planning and
And so
assessment.
the processes that you are currently describing in response to the question asked by Mr. Donnelly is to outline the process that has to be followed for a state significant process under that act.
Yes, the generic process.
Thank you.
So you'd not expect any deviation or variation from that. There is a process under the legislation that needs to be followed step by step, and it must be progressed in that way. What discussions are going on presently, formal or informal, between the department and other bodies or entities or organisations over the Sydney Gateway process? So, in other words, it's there. The project's there. It's been announced by the government. We're waiting for certain things to happen by the government in terms of, I suppose, using the cloak or get the paperwork in. But what else is going on in terms of discussions around this big state significant project?
Well, I mean, from a practical point of view, we haven't received that initial kick-off request for environmental assessment requirements, and so there might be some briefings from time to time about the status of the project. I mean, you know, how soon it was going to. We might receive that letter,
Right.
but
So when was the last briefing you had from the government?
I would have to take that on notice.
You take that on notice.
Yeah.
We've had some initial discussions about the planning pathway for the project. It's quite complex because the project it goes across Commonwealth land and
Yes.
the airport land, so
We'll come to that, yeah.
it will require approval under a range of Commonwealth and state acts. So we've had discussions with RMS about how we should manage that, and that's, I suppose, been the focus of the discussions prior to the application.
Just to follow that up, which Commonwealth, it has to be assessed under the Airports Act, is that correct? Under the Commonwealth Airports Act?
Right.
Does it have to be under the Commonwealth's Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Act?
I understand a decision has been made on that yet because that will be triggered by environmental impact.
Okay, but there is a potential for it to need to be assessed, to be determined?
There is a potential, yes.
What are the Commonwealth laws?
So the Commonwealth Act is the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, and the need to assess under that act is in relation to measures of national environmental significance. So my understanding, potentially for this project, it could be an ecological impact.
Okay, so but the two principal Commonwealth instruments for assessment are the Airports Act and the EPA-B Act, that's correct?
I think so in this circumstance.
And then the principal New South Wales Act, or the only New South Wales Act, is the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act?
Yes.
That's correct. So it's the three acts?
Potentially, yes. Yep.
With respect to the Airports Act, does this come into play because some of the land involved in this project is Commonwealth-owned land, or it is New South Wales state-owned land caught by the Commonwealth Act?
My understanding is it's Commonwealth land subject to the airport.
Right. Okay.
How will you manage the interaction between federal and state law?
We will be assessing it to the state law, but we will be in liaison with our Commonwealth partners to ensure that we create a parallel process that addresses both requirements.
And a parallel process that occurs simultaneously in time?
Yes.
Is that the intention?
Yes.
Have you secured the Commonwealth's agreement for that?
It's a matter for the RMS.
So the RMS has to secure the Commonwealth's agreement for that?
I understand the RMS is working with the Commonwealth to facilitate that.
Okay, but that doesn't really answer my question. Is it their responsibility or yours?
It's the RMS's responsibility.
And I had to come back to you with some form of memorandum of agreement or some other explanatory document which would in fact codify and explain that agreement's been reached?
I don't know what form it will be at this stage, but the discussions to date have been about facilitating a parallel process.
But to satisfy the department and the EPA, would you be looking for a substantial statement or a very clear statement that the agreement's been reached and there is a process in place for this to progress?
At this stage, I don't know at this stage.
But effectively, any agreement that you reach with the Commonwealth will be of its nature administrative, as in you will agree that you will each agree to try to assess it at the same time. That's correct?
If there is an agreement,
If
yes.
there is,
Yes,
yes.
there is an agreement.
Yes.
Are you involved in the negotiations with the Commonwealth on that, or are the RMS just going to come to you?
We're not directly involved, no.
I was just going to ask, in respect to the earlier environmental approvals for the M4 widening, the M4 east to King George's Exchange, from the date of, I guess, this informal level of talks to the consent conditions or the approval, or the determination, actually, I think, by the Minister, how long did it take?
Well, I think it varies. It can vary, but it often is. These projects take some time to develop internally within RMS, and then we've just been discussing, for example, the Sydney Gateway.
So I see that the M4 widening, the Director General at the time, Mr. Haddad, made his Director General requirements, which I think were what you were referring to as environmental things to be complied with in the EIS. He made that on the 4th of November 2013, and I see that the Minister approved it maybe a year afterwards. Is that consistent with your memory?
Yes, I think it was slightly longer. I think it was December 2014.
Oh, it was longer.
Yeah.
That was for the M4. And what about for the M4, M5? I mean, I can check the website here.
Yeah.
But basically, it's about 2 years, isn't it? 18 months to 2 years is on average how long it takes.
Yes, I wouldn't dispute. I think that's about right.
And they didn't involve any interaction with the Commonwealth, did they?
The M5 did involve interaction with the
The
Commonwealth.
M4 widening didn't, the M4, M5? Were they required assessments under the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Act Commonwealth?
I don't think so, no.
So it took roughly 18 months to 2 years, and it didn't require Commonwealth approval for those two stages. But in respect to the Gateway, Gateway is more complicated because it does, that's correct?
Well, can I just say this? I think we need to be comparing apples with apples, because we don't even have a request.
I know.
We don't have a request for those environmental assessment requirements for Gateway.
You haven't started yet.
And so what we've been looking at with your last set of questions is the period of time from when we do get an environmental assessment requirement to determination.
So your point is right, the clock hasn't started yet on Gateway. My point is that we had Mr. Konofsky come to us on Tuesday and say that he thinks that the EIS will be with you at the end of next year. And then that means that that's really when the clock starts ticking. That's before we get anywhere near the levels of interaction with the Commonwealth instruments. But he says that the thing will be finished by 2023. So if you're saying that in general it takes roughly 18 months on a relatively simple one that doesn't involve Commonwealth interaction, and granted it's complicated, I get it, it's a major motorway, but doesn't require Commonwealth, how can we have any levels of confidence that RMS is not going to start construction without approval?
Well, the RMS is not permitted to start construction without approval.
How do we have any confidence that they are going to meet that timetable? Because if they are saying this gateway is going to be open in 2023, and you've just effectively, on the basis of the facts that you've given us, effectively saying that the approvals may not even be done at that point. If they're lodging at the end of 2019, they might not be getting approval in 2021. Are we meant to believe they can get this built in 2 years?
I think that's a matter that you'll have to ask them.
Yes, Kate Fearon.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Ray, just going back to your opening statement, you discussed some of the key benefits as well as the impacts of WestConnex. Some of the impacts that you mentioned were things such as the high level of impact on acoustic and visual amenity and traffic, particularly during construction, obviously in some local areas permanently, acquisition of residential properties, business and open space, greatest impact being at Haberfield and Ashfield. You also mentioned air ventilation facilities to exhaust tunnel emissions, quality assessments which have to be undertaken each year. Has the department calculated the cost of those impacts?
Well, the department's assessed those impacts through the EIS. So in relation to the cost of those impacts, what are you specifically referring to? So
you also said in your opening statement that although each of the projects have social and environmental impacts, the department's assessments determined that on balance, the benefits of each project outweighed the impacts. So how did you assess the impacts in terms of a cost-benefit ratio, what we've seen with the cost-benefit ratio undertaken by RMS is in fact that the only impacts that they looked at were capital and operating costs, I believe, not the costs that I've just mentioned and not the cost you have put in your statement. So what are the costs of everything I've just said, and how, and you said and admitted in your opening statement, how did you weigh up the benefits and costs?
So that process is a process which looks at where there isn't a cost benefit analysis done for the project in this particular assessment. What happens with the project is the impacts are looked at, the benefits are looked at, the impacts are looked at. The impacts then are looked at against the various health standards and environmental protection standards that are required, and whether those impacts meet the relevant standards, whether they can meet the health standards, whether they can meet the standards for environmental impact, environment protection.
Well, why then, Mr. Ray? So let's think about stage 3. Why then did stage 3 get approved despite the EPA, the Environmental Protection Authority, making it clear in their submission on the environmental impact statement that they do not support the project approval because the impacts of the project have not been fully quantified and the EPA cannot determine whether the mitigation measures proposed are appropriate? You were just saying, I think, that the EPA continue. You were saying that everything was taken into consideration and the EPA was fine about it.
So, I'd have to. Could you give me that particular quote from, because that could be
I've got a letter
earlier.
here. So this is not a quote. This is well, it's a quote from the EPA's response to the EIS to the planning department to essentially say to you that they do not approve of this being approved because the impacts of the project have not been fully quantified. So the Department of Transport goes ahead and approves it anyway, despite what the EPA says. So the EIS, the environmental impact statement, doesn't have the support of the EPA.
So the process. So the process.
Mr. Ray, the EIS did not have the support. Sorry, the EIS, yes, did not have the support of the EPA.
So
I have the letter that says it didn't. No.
So if I could actually answer.
It's a simple question.
Allow the witness to answer the question in the way he wishes to answer it.
Thank you. All right, Chair.
I'm just setting precedence here.
Indeed.
So the process of assessment is an iterative one, and all agencies and the community have the opportunity to make submissions on the environmental impact statement. Those submissions are considered by both the department and the proponent, and the proponent is obliged to do a response to submissions. So, and address the issues of the Environment Protection Authority, other government agencies, the local councils, the department, and community submissions as well.
Okay, thank you. So going to construction of WestConnex Stage 2, thank you, I've got limited time, M4 East and the new M5. So why was the contract for the construction of these stages granted before planning approval was given?
Well, that's a matter you'd have to address to RMS.
What's your opinion of that?
Well, as I've said, it's a matter that you'll have to ask RMS. It's not a matter that the Department of Planning...
How much pressure does that place on the planning department then when we have, let's see, this was in June 2015, the contract was awarded to latent contractors and the consortium for the preferred design and construction. And then in September 2015, the joint venture they were selected as preferred tenderer. This was all before planning approval was given, which was given on the 20th of April 2016. So what impact would have there been, for example, if you did not give planning approval? Would there have been significant cost to taxpayers in terms of breach of contracts?
Well, that's a matter for the RMS. So I'm not privy to the details of what the contract is.
It makes it very difficult for you to reject a planning approval, doesn't it, Mr. Ray, if the contracts have already been awarded? What would have happened if planning said no to these approvals and didn't issue an approval? Can you just talk me through that situation?
Well, I mean, that would be, so you'd have to, as to the details of that, you'd have to ask RMS, because RMS know what's in the contract.
Did you communicate with anybody when you saw that those contracts had been issued? Did you issue any concern to ministers or to the RMS that in fact the project had not been approved yet? How could they be issuing contracts?
So I think it was well understood
It was going to be approved.
within government that it was a matter that the RMS would have to deal with if the project was not approved, or not approved within the time frame that the RMS had provided for the contract. So that's a matter for RMS.
There's likely to be a clause in the contract that will cover that.
Move on to the government questions
Thank
now.
you, Mr Chair. Mr Chair, thanks for coming in, Mr Snow, Mr Ray. Is the Office on Environment and Heritage a subunit of DPE?
It's an independent agency, but it's within the DPE cluster.
Within the cluster. There have been reports from previous witnesses that the Rozelle Air Monitoring Facility in the Office of Environment of Heritage is inoperative, necessitating locals having to spend thousands of dollars on their own air monitoring equipment. Are you aware, is the Rozelle Air Monitoring Unit operational at the current time?
I'm not aware.
Would you take that on notice?
Yep,
Thank you very
certainly.
much. Is it the usual routine of the Department of Planning and Environment to fabricate air quality figures?
No.
No. So if there were a website from the Office of Environment and Heritage which listed the daily air quality index from Rozelle from yesterday, those figures would no doubt be coming from an air quality monitoring device, wouldn't they?
I would assume so.
Thank
yes.
you. Thanks very much. In your estimation, does DPE in New South Wales adhere to a best practice planning methodology and process?
Yes.
Has the same planning and methodology process been applied to the WestConnex projects?
Yes.
Has DPE been happy with SMC's community consultation for each stage of WestConnex?
I think the department has spoken to SMC in the past, particularly in relation to the M4 East, and we've seen significant improvements as a result of the interactions we've had.
Just getting on to the EIS submissions, would it be fair to say that the EIS submissions for WestConnex have been rigorous and comprehensive?
The department's assessment certainly has been.
Thank you. In your estimation, how much would each WestConnex EIS submission cost to produce? Just in round terms, are we talking like a few $1,000s or tens of $1,000s or millions of dollars?
Well, look, I mean, it would certainly be in the millions of dollars, but it's a question for RMS.
Mm-hmm. And presumably submissions of this size and scale for state significant infrastructure projects would use top-tier practice consultants?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Chair.
Yes, Mr
Thank
Mellon.
you. Good morning. Thank you for your very comprehensive opening statement. I appreciate it, and providing some copies. You outlined I think, is it 5 projects that
Yes.
you've assessed? Does each project take into account the previous project? Is there like a cumulative assessment also?
Yes.
And you want to just outline how that would work?
So obviously, because it's a series of stages in a project, as new information comes to hand, or as there are design changes in the project, we assess the cumulative impact of those changes and the effect that those changes would have on the earlier stages of the project.
As it moves along?
As it moves along, yeah.
Okay, it's almost like a living document in a
Yes.
sense. Yeah. Well, that brings me to some evidence we heard the day before yesterday from Inner West Council and some residents was that, and we've seen in the media reports, the changes in the project as it's been going. You know, the dive sites have been moved, the proposal to acquire a site for a dive site, then that abandoned, then the proposal to acquire a site for construction sheds, then that changed. Are those types of changes advised to the department? And I guess if they have a greater any negative impact, you'd have a look at that. How does that work?
Yes. So the approvals provide for the work to be carried out, and if there's any major changes or significant changes, the Roads and Maritime Services would come in and lodge a modification application to modify the approval.
And has that happened? Is it?
Yes, sir.
A number of times.
Yeah,
yes.
operational changes, I guess, in effect, and then that flows into traffic and noise impacts. So you'd have to reassess it.
Yes. So those. So there's an assessment process. Environmental assessment requirements are given. There's an environmental assessment that's provided. Community consultation on anything that's significant, and that's all considered. And then there's an assessment done of those changes.
Okay, and that's on your website. That type of change.
Yes, all of this information is publicly available on our website.
So as soon as you're notified, it goes on the website.
Yes.
The community can look at that.
Yes.
Okay. All right. You talk about the benefits of the projects, and one of the benefits is delivery of new and upgrades to pedestrian and cycling infrastructure. We've got information about additional public open space and parklands. So, what role does the department have in making sure those benefits are delivered in the assessment?
Well, these matters are matters that are key conditions in the approval, and so the department works to ensure that these initiatives, cycleways, pedestrian connections, open space, are delivered by RMS and the contract.
A condition of consent.
Yes, there'll be a condition of consent.
Okay. The Mayor of Inner West Council suggests to us that I haven't got the figures in front of me, I think it was 10-hectare park at the Roselle Goodyard site that is down to be returned as parkland and fields to the council, will probably come back as a concrete slab.
He didn't say that. He said he was in fear that it would.
I see he suggested it. What's the level of detail of the requirement of the public benefit in the approval process?
The conditions are clear about the standard to which that has to be developed, and so it's returned back in that standard. So that's all very clear and I'm pretty sure that it doesn't say it's going to be delivered as a concrete slab.
It'd likely have to be landscape parkland. Yes. Right. You talked about the construction noise insulation program. Do you want to outline what that involves?
Well, obviously people are affected by construction noise, particularly around the construction sites and where the tunnels come out, and they, they do need to be protected. So there's a program, and particularly for the M4, M5 link, where some of the people will have been subject to multiple construction periods for the M4 East and for the link. We've required RMS to put insulation in at an early stage, so that the insulation doesn't just go in later on at the operational stage, and it's a full insulation much earlier than it would have otherwise been. So not sort of temporary insulation or noise barriers or things of that nature.
To identify.
To identified properties, yes, that will be affected. So that's clearly based on the science and the evidence of which properties will be affected by noise, and what mitigation treatments would be suitable to provide a better level of amenity.
Construction noise.
Construction noise.
That includes truck movements.
Yes, truck movements, spoil, operations of the facilities. Yes.
So do you use independent consultants to advise you which properties would likely be impacted?
So indeed, we've required an independent acoustics advisor to be appointed to advise RMS on what level of treatment should be made available to each individual property.
Oh, so it's like a sliding scale, depending on the noise impacts?
Yes, but the important thing, I think, is it's not RMS or SMC or the contractors making that decision in isolation. There is an independent expert who is providing advice.
We're talking double glazing, triple glazing,
Air
ceiling,
conditioning.
air conditioning.
Yes, a range of measures.
How many properties have had that those treatments?
Oh, I'm not sure. It is mapped in the
You can
approval.
take that on
though.
notice
We
if
can
you
take
want.
We'll
but it
take
is-
it on.
It is mapped in the approval though.
All right, just onto the Sydney Gateway project that we were discussing before. The works are going on down there now. That's not the Gateway project at the airport. That's the road widening around the.
Doesn't form part of the gateway. No.
Because I was just hearing it hasn't started. Some work down there. Okay, and clearly, my interpretation of what's happened with this is that the scope was widened out on that project than what was initially thought of. I mean, it's involving railway lines being moved and so forth. Is that the view that you'd have?
Look, I would say that the project is a particularly complicated one. It's got to interact with the airport and it's got to interact with the goods line and also feed into the interchange at St Peters. So it is a particularly
So from
complex.
concept to where it's getting to now, it got more complicated.
But not Port Botany.
I
All roads lead to Port Botany. We heard that last week.
Yes, I think it has. I would reflect from my understanding that it has got more complicated.
All right, thank you for that.
I just have one further quick question, and that is, Mr. Rowe, Mr. Snow. Oh, has it gone?
3 minutes.
Okay. Mr. Rowe, Mr. Snow, at any stage has the Premier, any of your portfolio ministers or the Minister for Roads intervened to seek to have DPE's usual planning and assessment methodology changed for any stage of the WestConnex process?
No,
So there's been no political interference in your departmental processes in this respect?
no.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Feng.
Thank you. You speak of the compliance measures in your opening statement. Do you believe that the compliance team has been rigorous and thorough in its investigations and diligence on the project?
Yes, I do. I think the compliance team, I think co-locating them at the Inner West Council at Leichhardt meant that they could be on the ground and be available to the community. And they certainly have been able to meet the community on the community's terms and have been quite dedicated really into ensuring that community concerns were addressed, and also that the contractors, whether they be subcontractors, principal contractors, all the agencies, complied with the terms of the approvals and also the spirit of the approvals.
So the compliance team have been available to the public. They're co-located with Inner West Council, which makes them available to, I guess, to see complaints in a quick and methodical manner. And they've been very effective in the way that they've carried out their business.
And according to the submissions we've received,
Can
actually.
the members restrain
just
themselves?
saying.
You're not your,
That's a
Giving
statement,
evidence.
not
it's not
according
your
to the submissions
session,
we received.
and you're not
I'm just seeking
being questioned.
You've got to sit over there, Kate, if you want to do that.
So they've been very keen. They've gone to many community meetings, and they have been trying very, very hard to ensure that there's a good explanation to the community, and that, as I said, that the contractors, whether they be principal contractors, subcontractors, or the agencies, respond to the community concerns. The important thing for the department is that we have an approval, or a series of approvals, and people need to abide by the approvals.
And they seem to, I'm sorry. I was going to say they seem to have been quite active with 3 penalty notices and 33 official cautions.
Yes, so there's been a range of breaches. Most of them probably by the principal contractors, but some by subcontractors, and they've been on the ground there. They've been dealing with those, and those penalty notices and those official cautions have been assessed in accordance with the department's compliance policy, and those decisions about what level of enforcement action is taken is taken by a committee in the compliance team, and those actions have been communicated and penalty notices have been issued. I think one of the penalty notices is being contested at the moment, and that's the right of the person that gets the penalty notice.
It's interesting that they're co-located with the Inner West Council, and the Mayor didn't tell us that. So that means that they've been working with the Rangers and the Council Department of Planning about complaints, noise complaints and traffic movements on wrong streets and so forth?
Yes, absolutely. They've been working with the Inner West Council's WestConnex unit, and being very active in the space with council staff to try and make a difference.
Last question, because it'll help us a bit. On Monday, I think it's Monday, yes, the City of Sydney's here, and we know they're a strong critic of WestConnex. Has the same sort of, only on the southern edge of the City of Sydney, I know the St Peters area where the Sydney Park is, has there been that sort of relationship with the City of Sydney's enforcement unit?
So while the unit is co-located at Inner West Council, it also works with the City of Sydney, it works with Canada Bay, it works with Canterbury, Bankstown Council, all the relevant councils, to try and get a very close relationship and actually address community issues on the ground.
They're not co-located with the City of Sydney?
No.
Just following up those questions, there was a brief mention about the number of cautions and breaches. Could you put that on the record? How many cautions and breaches have been?
Yeah, so I did actually put that on the record. It's 3 penalty notices and 33 official cautions.
What were they for?
If you'll just bear with me, I do have that somewhere.
You had your question time.
I'm sure the everyone still are.
Was that an unusually high number?
I would,
compared to other projects?
In some cases, the numbers, because there are 3 joint venture principal contractors, we have to issue 3 official cautions because they're all working together. So in some of the cases, there was only one breach, but there were 3 official cautions issued. In other cases, there was 1 breach, and it was issued to a subcontractor, or it was issued to SMC or RMS.
So just to clarify, those figures that you said to us before in terms of numbers, sometimes you were talking about the 1 breach, but you had to issue the various things to more than one contractor.
Yes, in relation to the official, relation to the official cautions. Yes.
What were they for again?
But we should focus on the actual number of breaches,
Yes.
because it's misleading to...
Yes, and I can actually get you the number. I will get you the number of breaches, but I can actually.
I think Mr. Mookie also wanted to know what they were for.
Yeah.
Would you be able to take that on notice?
Yes, I can take that on notice.
If you've got it here, feel free to tell us.
There's most of the penalty notices were in relation to trucks not being on appropriate roads, being on local roads. So there were 3 separate breaches for that. And in relation to the official cautions, they related to blocking residential access. They related to inadequate notification of nighttime works, where there were short notice periods given to the community that was in breach of the requirements. There was also a number of breaches in relation to a shipping container noise wall and removal of on-street parking.
How many official cautions does one of the contractors have to receive, for example, before they're issued with a penalty in relation to the nighttime noise that you're suggesting? So they get an official caution. Can they continue getting official cautions, or is it at some point that they will actually receive a penalty?
So each breach is assessed on its merits in accordance with the department's compliance policy, and it goes to the question of official cautions goes to the extent of the harm and whether the harm can be was being able to be rectified very quickly, and whether the nature of the willingness of the person that actually, or the company that actually undertook the breach to actually fix the problem systemically, And in some cases, that was not able to be done, and there was a penalty notice issued.
Mr. Ray, you were just telling us the other nature of the incidents. I think we interrupted you halfway
Yes,
through.
look, I think that was a broad. I think that's essentially. I can find. What I'll do is I'll give you any other matters on notice,
Right.
if that's okay.
Can you tell us just last thing, the period of time that those were conducted other?
Mookie,
Sorry, Mr. Chair.
this is my
Oh,
session. Thank you.
You can join his party.
I knew I was taking your time.
Thank you. In your statements, there was a reference to having to do with hydraulic subsidence. Could you relate
Yeah, so there
that
obviously
occurs
that-
and how serious it was?
So there are groundwater issues. There are groundwater issues and subsidence issues, particularly in relation to both the M5 and the M4 M5 link. I think not so much in relation to the M4 East, but I can get you more details of those if you wish.
Just particularly the main location where that was occurring?
I'll take that on notice.
Thank you. Over the years, we've heard lots of complaints about the M5 ventilation. I got the impression from other evidence that the very poor ventilation equipment is being retained in the M5, or is there a plan to upgrade that?
So the approval in relation to the new M5 does not encompass the existing M5. It's ventilation equipment. So there's been no approval sought from the department to change the conditions that apply to the current M5 in relation to the ventilation equipment.
So even though it needs upgrading, it won't be upgraded then?
Not as a result of these processes.
Should it be?
I think that's a matter. That's a matter for the RMS and the EPA.
Thank you. You also indicated that the M4, M5 link will reduce traffic volumes, etc., by up to 50%. That seems to be a very large percentage. Is that?
I didn't say 50%, Chair. It will reduce traffic volumes on local roads, but I did not give a percentage.
That's part of the.
It's the one in Callum Park.
That's
The government
all of
submission,
government
is it?
submission, isn't
Yeah, it's a government submission. Yeah,
it? All of government, yeah.
it's part of the submission from the New South Wales government. Did you have any role in preparing that submission then?
I did not have any role in preparing that submission.
Do you feel you should have been consulted as the key planning people, or even approve it or make sure it's factually correct?
Did we see it? No, I didn't. We did not see it. So
You've never seen the submission?
no.
You weren't consulted?
Well, not before it was lodged. No.
You weren't consulted in this
No.
compilation? So,
You doubt those figures though, do you?
No, I don't doubt those figures.
You just don't verify.
that puts a question in our mind as the accuracy then of those figures, as to where they've come from.
Can I take that on notice and provide you with that information?
Yes, particularly the
Chair.
reduction in traffic volumes by up to 50%. And the other one was reducing greenhouse gas emissions by more than 610,000 tonnes a year.
And the
Whether that-
modelling behind it, Chair, I think is important, not just the figures, but the modelling behind those figures could be tabled.
So, well, thank you very much for appearing before our inquiry. We appreciate what you've had to share with us and your opening statement. So thank you very much.
Thanks,
Now,
Chair.
Thank you.
If the questions on notice, we'll compile those and send them to you from the Secretariat, so you don't have to rely on your memory. And so it's
Thank you, Chair.
from the time you get those questions on notice from the committee, the 21 days starts.
Okay. Thank you.
for our committee and for your submission. Could you, just for our Hansard record, please state your name, position, title, and swear either an oath or affirmation? The words are on the cards in front of you.
Okay, my name is Dr. Raven Nassar. I'm a specialist anaesthetist, and I would like to swear an oath. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Thank you. Would you like to start by making a short opening statement?
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman and members of this inquiry. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak today. In my submission, I've tried to summarise and present the most relevant health impacts due to air pollution, and I'm happy to discuss these further with you if you wish. However, I would also like to talk to this committee about a very real solution to the potential health impacts of WestConnex and all other similar road tunnel projects in this state, such as NorthConnex. If projects like these and others are going to proceed in favour over public transport, then we need to be very careful about the health impacts. However, if they are going to proceed, then we are presented with a golden opportunity to provide infrastructure and improve public health at the same time. And I would like to discuss a recent health impact statement from Belgium, which has modelled major improvements in health and a reduction in death rates when traffic is diverted from open roads and diverted into filtered road tunnels. Now, this is very comparable to what is happening with WestConnex. I have tabled a summary of this study as well as a copy of the health pyramid. I would like you just to take a look at this health pyramid if you don't mind. I think this is a very useful tool that is used around the world by people like yourself in making decisions on major infrastructure projects and their effects. And if you look, the apex of this pyramid is the mortality, the premature deaths. These are all due to air pollution effects. Down the pyramid are the less severe or non-fatal health effects, and as you can see, the populations affected increases dramatically. So when you're presented with an HIA, a health impacts assessment for some of these major infrastructure projects, the end point will usually be mortality. What isn't mentioned are the non-fatal effects that affect hundreds of people, thousands of people, and carry a major burden on the governments and the health system. These are not reported on. But I would just want to ask you, what do you think it costs to treat an acute stroke or an acute heart attack? And in Sydney, if you're having a heart attack, you're talking about ambulance transfers to an emergency department, triage by doctors and nurses, pathology tests, rush to a catheter lab, calling in people after hours, including specialists and specialty teams, cardiac rehab, and a lifelong of medications subsidised by the government. These costs are enormous, not only on a personal level, but on a budgetary level as well. And these I would like you to bear in mind when you're presented with the tip of this apex of the pyramid. If given time, I would like to talk about this trial a bit further, because it does decrease mortality significantly. And interestingly, the filtration that they used in their modelling was quite inefficient, yet they managed to gain major health impacts by using inefficient filtration. And that means that if we use current state-of-the-art technology, there is a potential to improve health impacts even further for our communities. And because this is a special opportunity to capture toxins in tunnels and actually get rid of them entirely from communities and our environment. And that affects every one of us, especially tunnel users and surrounding communities, as well as people that live in the greater Sydney Basin, who will be exposed to traffic fumes. And that is good public health practice. That concludes my introduction.
Thank you. Mr. Donnelly?
Dr. Nassar, thank you very much for coming along today, and thank you for your comprehensive submission, which is...
And you have to say this material that you just tabled?
Indeed, thank you, yes, which is submission number 210 to this inquiry, along with the supplementary material you provided this morning, so we appreciate the time and effort you put into this. With respect to this inquiry, we're obviously looking specifically at the WestConnex project, and we had government witnesses earlier this week, 2 days ago, describe the ventilation stacks and the ventilation system associated with the WestConnex project as world's best practice. And we note, of course, though, that the ventilation stacks will not be filtered. I've been trying to reconcile how that statement get made about it being world's best practice without filtration, or at least filtration of the standards which in other countries around the world. I'm wondering if you'd sort of care to comment on that and see if you can reconcile that.
Thank you very much for that question, and it is a very good question. As we are now seeing, international studies are using modelling that encompasses filtration, and they're putting out health impact assessments that show an improvement in health. This is using filtration. I find it very hard to find evidence in the scientific literature or in the medical literature that is comparable to anything of what we're doing here in Sydney, because most of the other tunnels that have been researched are either very short or are filtered, especially if they're in urban areas. So there is no comparable study, so it's hard to say it is best practice because we can't really compare it. But if you look at what's happening overseas in some similar tunnels, you will find that, for example, in Hong Kong, they are installing filtration in urban tunnels, and they're calling that a smart city project. They're putting in air purifiers and filtration, and this is also the case in Tokyo and in Madrid, in tunnels there. What we're having here are some very, very long tunnels in urban centres near very sensitive receptors, and sensitive receptors include children and nursing homes and people with predisposing conditions, elderly patients, and they are at risk. So I'm not quite sure what this is based on, this statement of current world best practice, because other countries are using different ventilation systems.
In terms of the situation of not having filtration to a high level, you obviously have stacks emitting what is the pollution from the tunnel. In economic terms, that's sort of described as an externality. There's an outcome associated with that. And of course, there's a cost associated with that externality. And you've touched on that in some detail, actually, in your submission from this sort of overall overarching health medical perspective. In other words, there's a cost associated with having this emitted and not filtered. I'm wondering, in terms of listing in a comprehensive way, without any exaggeration, but in a comprehensive way, these health matters, that's what you've sought to do in your submission. You've gone through a number of elements of the implications of the ingestion of air which is polluted. Is that what have you set out to make this as comprehensive as you can in terms of the elements?
So my main focus was to outline the actual health effects from air pollution, and most of the literature in the world is talking about ambient air pollution, what we breathe in. It's very hard to find literature on tunnels, and even harder to find any studies that are done around tunnel stacks and the ambient air around tunnel stacks and the health impacts thereafter. And it is a very difficult thing to measure because they are transient peaks and there are troughs, and often we only get averages. And so it is very hard to actually make a statement because the data isn't there. It hasn't been done. There are some local studies that are fairly weak, low numbers of studies, no real powerful follow-ups when there maybe should have been more powerful follow-up studies done. So it's hard to put an economic number on it. But overall, the submission was to address the overall detrimental health effects of air pollution, and bear in mind that environmental impact statements for tunnel projects like WestConnex show very, very high levels of pollutants inside the tunnels. So tunnel users will be subject to the highest levels of pollutants, and then those pollutants are ejected at a stack onto surrounding communities, but we don't know at what levels.
But it's your submission essentially that in effect, if we do have the use of tunnels for the use of motor vehicles and trucks, that in effect the tunnel in and of itself captures the pollutants, that if in fact there has to be ventilation of that tunnel, that it makes sense, it makes eminent sense, almost an obvious sense, to fit out the ventilation to ensure that those pollutants are extracted.
Absolutely right. That is absolutely right. So this is the unique opportunity where you can actually eliminate these toxins, which would otherwise on a surface road affect everyone.
Would disperse naturally.
Yes, and you have an opportunity to capture those toxins in a tube and entirely remove them, and therefore that is the golden opportunity to improve public health at the same time as providing infrastructure.
Thank you. I've got to pass on. Thank you.
Move on to...
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for coming along today and for your comprehensive submission. It's really great. In the submission, you mention that the reason you kind of undertook all this research was that you were going to live within 500 metres of a pollution stack of one of the road tunnels. Is that correct? And you researched for your wife and your two and 4-year-old children at that time. You wanted to assure them, try and reassure them that in fact it was safe to stay there. How did that go?
Yeah, that's all correct. And I tried very hard to find evidence that was going to reassure my wife, who's also an anaesthetist. And I looked very hard, and I just couldn't find anything that was reassuring. There were some papers that, were very vague, but there was no evidence. And like I mentioned earlier, there just haven't been studies done around tunnel stacks and ventilation stacks. But there certainly is a lot of evidence that is just coming out on a weekly basis that shows the detrimental effects of air pollution. And
particularly vehicle emissions.
Absolutely,
in terms of air pollution,
vehicle emissions, and
exhaust.
especially diesel vehicles.
That's right.
And diesel vehicles, the majority of the truck fleet is made up of diesel vehicles, and the tunnel that I was going to be affected by is specifically designed to carry a large load of diesel emitting large vehicles. And so I just didn't want to wait for any future evidence to come out. I didn't want to be part of a trial or of a study. I thought it would be wise to move away from the area because I wasn't convinced by what was out there.
Thank you. So why then, I wonder, did one of the representatives from RMS who appeared on Tuesday, when questioned in fact by the chair about the ventilation stacks near schools, I wonder why or where he got the research then to suggest that the facilities are located in the best possible locations. I think the thing to be clear about is that these facilities are safe. That is the important thing. They are safe for the entire community. Do you know where the RMS representative would have got the evidence to suggest that? I mean, you're sitting here as a health professional, your wife is a health professional, you've done this incredibly comprehensive document on the impacts of air pollution. It sounds like you've searched and searched and searched to find evidence that these ventilation stacks are safe. You sure you haven't found any evidence to suggest they're safe?
I'm sure. It was a big move, moving away, so I didn't do that lightheartedly. I had to convince myself and my family. The statements made by RMS and the ones that we were given at the time were based on modelling, and this is a computer modelling, and I'm no expert on the computer modelling, but it does rely, and by the way, there was also a health impacts assessment done for WestConnex, if I may refer to that particular tunnel. And I had a chance to speak to the statistician who compiled this health impacts assessment, and I asked her how much of her health outcomes were based on the information given to her by RMS, and she said 100% of my information is based by the information given to me by RMS. Now, for this particular location, there was no background data gathered on ambient air quality, or on wind speeds, or on dispersion. The stack is placed in a valley. The surrounding trees are higher than the stack. It's a low stack. And the area is prone to low wind speeds in the majority of time.
Which location are you referring to?
This is the Wahroonga stack. for the 9-kilometre long WestConnex tunnel. And we obviously tried to dispute this, but we kept getting the same response, and it wasn't convincing. So I'm not quite sure what modelling they used and how accurate that is. But I find it interesting that overseas they can use modelling, and it takes into account urban centres. It looks at the fact that buildings will prevent dispersion, and actually shows that filtration will improve surrounding communities' health.
Thank you.
Thank you again for coming in, Dr. Nasser. In your submission, you're very critical or warning the government about the impact of the WestConnex road tunnel. You said this is going to be Australia's longest road tunnel, 9 kilometres in length, 2 ventilation facilities at Wahroonga and West Pennant Hills. You've mentioned Wahroonga already, and in your submission you state they'll be in close proximity to 7,000 school students, that is the ventilation stacks. And you said you could find no other example of this occurring anywhere else in the world. So where did our government, New South Wales government, get their scientific backing for what they're doing? And the impression they're giving to people, by having tunnels, everyone will be healthier.
That's a very good question that I've asked myself many times, but I can't give you an answer.
So you just think it's a lack of scientific investigation prior to the development of the M5 and M4 tunnel system?
Yes, I guess I'd like to answer that by saying that I'm not the expert on the M5 tunnel ventilation or the health outcomes. I did touch on some of those reports. And statements were made by RMS that lessons had been learned and that improvements were being made. And I can see how they changed over to longitudinal ventilation and changed the gradients, etc., for the WestConnex tunnel. But really, I'm at a loss as to find out what other evidence they are relying on to make statements like this, when internationally we're seeing a lot of urban tunnels being filtered, and especially when you are surrounded by sensitive receptors like school children. And it is school children who absorb a lot of this pollution, especially when they're out exercising, out on the playgrounds. And that's the real worry. I see my role in this whole argument, in this whole debate, as the person who has got medical training, a medical background, and I've looked at evidence because I can interpret it. And I'm just basically seeing a fire here. I can see the smoke and I can see the fire. And I'm just trying to alert people to the fact that there is a fire. And I don't know what's burning. I don't know how long it will burn for. And I don't know who started the fire. That's up to tunnel engineers and ventilation engineers to assess. But I feel that my role in this whole argument is to just alert people to the fact that there is a fire and that we need to do something about air pollution and its treatment before it gets out of control.
And as you quoted, those 7,000 school students with the smokestacks at Wahroonga and so on, you haven't, and you could have included the number of children who are potentially suffering from asthma and breathing defects, nothing to do with the tunnel before the tunnel starts.
Absolutely right. And those children have been shown in other studies to be especially at risk to acute asthma attacks. And as a matter of fact, in London earlier this year, as you may see in my submission, there was a death, which is one of the first deaths in a child directly linked to air pollution. And it was a 9-year-old girl who had had numerous presentations to an emergency department with acute asthma attacks. And unfortunately, on the day that she died, there were critical levels of air pollution in her neighbourhood. And each of her previous admissions to hospital were linked to peaks in air pollution in her home area.
And I understand that the percentages of Australian children with the problems of asthma is higher than in other nations for some reason.
That's correct.
Could you provide further evidence to us in that area regarding that particular fact?
Yes, I'd be happy to put that on notice.
We'll move on to the government.
Thanks.
Dr. Phillips.
Thanks very much for coming in, Dr. Nasser. I'm very interested in the Belgian study which you've presented us with today and the consequences which flow from it. Is part of the benefit which accrues by diverting traffic to tunnelling the fact that you have less interaction with pedestrians with surface traffic as well too?
That is correct. So large studies have shown that health impacts occur within 50 metres of living near a major busy road, up to 500 metres. This study showed that there were health improvements for people living up to 1,500 metres away from this busy road. So just removing that surface traffic will decrease the surface dispersion and therefore have a beneficial health outcome for people in that area.
And also just like, while this is WestConnex, you are clearly a specialist on the NorthConnex. For that 9-kilometre tunnel, which essentially replicates an existing transport route of Pennant Hills Road up to Hornsby, you also get a benefit, don't you, by having a constant, if you like, constant speed through a tunnel as opposed to the start-stop you get on Pennant Hills Road. So rather than being exposed to particulate matter for maybe 20, 25 minutes, if you're going from the turn-off of the M2 up to Hornsby, you might be able to do it in 7 minutes, say, for an 80-kilometre speed limit. So you get reduced amounts of emissions by being able to maintain a constant speed through a tunnel.
Yes, that is true on days where there is no congestion in the tunnel.
Yep.
And days like that will quite clearly occur every so often. There is one public health argument that fails to sit comfortably with me, and that is the argument that you will improve the health of people living near Pennant Hills Road or any bypass road, but you will subject other communities to the pollution that is now taken away from this surface road at either end of the tunnel.
I see that's what your point is. Your point is that the current diffusion of particulate matter is all the way along Pennant Hills Road, and while it might be at higher levels along Pennant Hills Road, it's diffused more generally, whereas the imposition of exhaust stacks concentrates an arguably lower level of diffusion, but necessarily concentrates it in the area where those stacks go above ground. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And part of the way that you believe that that could be ameliorated would be the installation of scrubbers or some other form of device for those stacks so that particularly particulate matter is removed from the exhaust.
That's right. So I agree with that. They're actually currently already in use in Sydney. We're using electrostatic precipitators in the construction of the Sydney Metro Northwest Tunnel. So this is the technology that we are already using, and particularly there, we're using it to remove particulate matter from diesel engines to improve the health of workers in these tunnels. So this is technology that we're already utilising effectively and responsibly, and that is fantastic.
How much does it cost?
I'm not aware of this cost. I have been led to believe that overall it is approximately 1% of the overall project cost.
But your argument would be the health benefits which flow from the installation of scrubbers would exceed the amount which the cost, and including the ongoing maintenance?
Correct, absolutely right, and that is why I see this as a golden opportunity for any government to jump on this to improve public health and provide infrastructure at the same time.
Okay, so taking your concerns into account and the Belgian case study, would it be fair to say that you believe an optimal solution, presuming of course we don't just ban cars entirely, an optimal solution for currently heavily congested surface roads is subsurface with proper ventilation for proper ventilation and scrubbing of exhaust fumes? Is that the optimal solution?
Public transport is there as well, surely.
Correct. I agree with both. But like you say, if we are going to go ahead with these projects, as I've said in my submission, public transport and discouraging vehicle use is at the top of the list. But if we are going to go ahead with these projects, and we are for some of them, then I agree. Then that would be a wonderful way to improve the health of not just tunnel users, who will be subject to the highest levels of toxic pollution, but the surrounding communities as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nasser. Are you aware of the government's tunnel air quality reforms? The recent reforms to tunnel air quality?
I haven't studied them. I have glanced over them, so I wouldn't be able to.
All right, they're fundamental to what you're
Yes.
talking to us about. So the government will not approve a motorway tunnel project until the Advisory Committee on Tunnel Air Quality has provided a review. I'll just outline it for you and you can comment on it. The government will not approve a motorway tunnel project until the New South Wales Chief Health Officer releases a statement on the potential health impacts. And the motorway operator are now required to get a licence from the EPA annually, every year, for all tunnel emission stacks, including the old ones, as well as the ones that are being built now. So EPA licence per annum each year is an assurance or a reassurance that that air quality standards are
That's nothing
coming
of
from
the
that.
sort.
What's your view on that?
So my view on that is, I mean, that's obviously very important to do. However, we have got guidelines for air quality, okay? The WHO has guidelines, the American EPA has guidelines. And there are currently a number, and it is changing all around the world, these safe limits. What we do know, and these advisory committees will be guided by these current guidelines. These guidelines are probably already dated in Australia and all around the world. They are being outdated by the evidence. What is very clear is that the majority of deaths, for example, in the United Kingdom last year, there were 29,000 premature deaths from air pollution exposure, and the majority of those occurred in what we would consider safe levels of ambient air.
I accept that, and that, you know, science and our knowledge and evidence is always evolving. But I mean, we have to rely upon the EPA to be up to date with their international colleagues
And Kerry Chant.
and applying their
Chief Health Officer.
That's right, Kerry, the Chief Health Officer, applying their rigour to it, reassuring the public. Now, of course, if the standard changes, then they need to change the licensing. That's the beauty of the annual licensing now, as opposed to one-off approval, which is what was in place before. So I'm just putting it to you that we have to rely upon the scientists in the EPA, relying upon the research they can get to apply the standards. As you said, there might be a lack of research, but that's our assurance.
It is an assurance. I guess I'm dictated by what you would call the precautionary principle, which states that if you're not sure if something is safe, you don't go ahead unless you can convince yourself that it is safe.
Probably shouldn't leave the house.
And the
then.
EPA has
Well, thank you very
additional
much for
licence.
coming in and giving evidence to our inquiry.
Sorry,
Unfortunately,
Kevin,
the time's
Thank you, Doctor.
elapsed.
Why do you
And
hate
you
the
only have
EPA?
one question on notice, so
Hate
you
the
have
EPA,
21
don't you?
days to answer that question. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We'll adjourn for morning
Thank you
tea.
for the comprehensive work.
North Progress Association. I welcome you as our next witnesses. I remind everyone that no matter what they think about what is being said, people in the audience need to listen to the debate quietly. Applause, jeering or any other gestures are not permitted. If they have something to say to those who are sitting next to them, they should do so quietly. There should be no audible conversation. Photographs and filming are not permitted apart from the media photographers who have been authorised to do so. No signs or other props are to be utilised during the debate. Could each witness, starting from my left, please state their name, position, title and swear either an oath or affirmation. Thank you. The words are on the card in front of you.
Thank you. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Thank you.
John English.
Catherine Kelman, member of the Beverly Hills North Progress Association. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Do either of you wish to make an opening statement?
Yes, please.
Thank you. It needs to be brief, and we're happy to have one.
I'll work on that. There's a document that I've tabled that'll be going around, which is a little bit more detail on what I'm going to speak about. But on behalf of the Beverly Hills North residents, I'd like to thank the committee for their inquiry into the conduct of WestConnex. Our experience at Beverly Hills has been catastrophic. The disregard for the community's concerns and complaints are perpetuated throughout the whole construction process. The facade of consultation has been paper thin, with lies and deceitful reporting on the community's concerns. The EIS process, together with the community submission process and the WestConnex complaints hotline, has been as useless as a chocolate teapot. I would like to illustrate this with a few examples. Firstly, the noise walls, which have been constructed to choreograph the M5 motorist's journey and to achieve symmetrical perspective. To achieve this objective, and despite community objections, transparent noise walls have been installed, noise wall heights have been lowered, and panels on the Coolangatta Road Bridge have not been fitted. These breaches of the EIS have gone unscrutinised and uncontested. The vague and bland language used in the compliance reports in regard to community complaints is deceitful, misleading, inaccurate, and has no attempt to take any responsibility. There is no plans to apologise or rectify their errors. In reference to the Coolangatta Road Bridge, the opening in the noise walls, at a meeting with the Minister for WestConnex, a request was tabled to monitor the noise being funnelled out of the opening in the noise wall over the Coolangatta Road Bridge. This was discussed and agreed to. 1 year later, this commitment disappeared. The operational noise assessment was conducted and released with no measurement of the M5 traffic noise that was being funnelled out of the noise wall opening. High volume noise traffic from heavy vehicle compression brakes and horn blasts, referred to as maximum noise events, are driving the residents crazy. The compression brakes start from 4:30 a.m. and the explosion of heavy vehicle horn blasts starts from 5:30 a.m. in the morning, and they are getting earlier. These maximum noise events are measured in the pre-construction noise assessment at 65 to 80 decibels, an average of 55 times per night. These events have not been reported and are not measured in the post-construction noise report. The third item is about Beverly Hills Grove Park, recreational space not being returned to the community for recreational use. Due to the new M5 portal at Kingsgrove, Beverly Grove Park recreational space will be diminished by at least 90%. So the community requested that WestConnex acquired industrial site east of the park be made available for basketball courts, futsal fields, cricket nets, as well as barbecue and shaded picnic facilities. During initial consultations, the merits of this proposal were recognised as a valid option and would be subject to assessment. 2 years on, and with no further consultation, the proposal has evaporated. The residents of Kingsgrove North are entitled to compensation in the form of return of some of their recreational space. They have been given nothing. WestConnex cannot be allowed to trample over the community and ruin, trample over the communities that they ruin, manufacture some reason why they can't fix it, and again walk away in complete impunity. Where does the buck stop? Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll commence with questions from the...
I had my opening statement.
Oh, sorry, you've got an opening statement too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to us. Our homes are damaged by WestConnex construction. Our complaints are ignored. Property damage during infrastructure build is a predictable outcome. It's how the proponent deals with the issue that we take to task here. We find that there is a failure to provide critical documents that residents have a right to access, a failure to identify and then mitigate the risk of damage from groundwater changes due to drainage, a failure to mitigate damage due to vibrations, a failure of the Department of Planning to enforce the compliance of the condition of approval on WestConnex for property damage. I have tabled the case studies of families across the route that are also reporting damage. And just like the home acquisition debacle, we have experienced the same treatment from WestConnex with bullying, intimidation and the denial of raw responsibility. This matter is urgent. The number of families impacted by WestConnex property damage can only likely to continue to rise as construction progresses. Now, quoting my engineer, a reason is due to the huge swathe of the inner west from Ryde to Cogra is built on the residual clays of the weathering Ashfield shales. This is a highly reactive soil type that reacts to lowered moisture content brought about by the significant new drainage for roadway runoff and deep excavations. Tunnelling vibrations are also an issue. And we find that despite the probability that some homes will be damaged, it's expected, we find WestConnex and their contractors issue immediate denials without substance. And what we're concerned about is that once the contractor receives sign-off, such as in our case Fulton Hogan, they just simply walk away. There does not seem to be any accountability. And so basically what happens is that families seem to be left to personally pay the repair bills for damages caused by WestConnex construction. And the reality is that every homeowner across this route is fully exposed to that risk. This damage is not covered by home insurance policies. I'd like to make some recommendations to the committee. The methodology of the RMS and WestConnex, how they issue home dilapidations reports, is totally inadequate and dismissive. We are just simply experiencing stonewalling and hollow responses. We would like to recommend that the dilapidation process on how the contractor appoints their own engineer to conduct assessments be urgently reviewed. It's just like putting the fox in charge of the hen house, and thus families, we have no trust in this flawed process. We request this committee to use its influence to compel WestConnex to supply the detailed design and measurements that we need regarding drainage, soil moisture content and vibrations to residents. And I ask, if WestConnex's claim of no fault is true, then let's put it to bed. They should have nothing to hide with that by continuing to conceal these documents. We also recommend that there be appointment of an independent arm's-length arbiter that will oversee that the damage complaints process is conducted honestly, fairly and professionally. And although this should be the role of the Department of Planning, we find that the WestConnex Compliance Office are quite ineffective. I just wanted to add just one further thing about the impact at Beverly Hills and Kingsgrove. Just a couple of facts to add to Dr. Nasser. That at Kingsgrove, the unfiltered exhaust stack is located in the valley. We have 2 children's schools that are up the hill and 2 sports fields. Further, the EIS states that up to 40% of the existing M5 traffic is predicted to flood our local roads like King George's, Stony Creek, Canterbury and Forest. That's actually impacting a lot more schools. On a final note, I wish to just have a final statement that this whole episode, I spent thousands and thousands of hours. This entire episode of dealing with WestConnex and the RMS has been appalling. Last year I had 2 cancer diagnoses. And because we knew we had to take the RMS to court, to get compensation for our property damage of some, our engineer predicts at least 200,000. I had to cancel my sick leave to start chemotherapy a couple of days after starting chemo. So it's very personal to me of what WestConnex has done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll commence with the
Thank you, Chair.
Labor opposition.
And thank you both very much for coming along today. Your submissions are very comprehensive, the ones that have been provided already to the committee, and the additional information today is very helpful. Can I just actually start with this question, that with respect to the Beverly Hills North Progress Association, which obviously has put together a great deal of material on the impact of the WestConnex project on their communities, did it come together to do this specifically, or it's actually a Progress Association which has other interests and other activities? Just give me just a snapshot of what the organisation.
We have other activities as well.
Yes.
So we've both nominated to be part of the Georges River Council Community Liaison. We have dealt with other issues previously, but this is an issue that we have been spending some years on now.
So this is the point I'm getting at, that you're sort of use the term a typical Progress Association, which we find in communities around the city and around the state. But the WestConnex project has really brought people together in a very focused and pointed way. Did they, that is, people from the community, that residents and people who live, they just simply came and reported to the Progress Association that there were a number of issues that were troubling them, and they were finding that they were struggling getting any answers to questions that they were raised or matters they were posing?
There's a little bit of background to the association on the back page of that submission to give you a bit of. So the community were already aware of the fact that there was a Progress Association which should deal with a number of issues in the past. But since the original WestConnex, the original M5 was put through, our work in the community, which you would say was dormant, but it was dealing with other issues. Say, for example, little issues with people, with traffic, or dealing with the councils, roundabouts, things like that were going, pedestrian crossings, those sorts of things in the community.
Now, in terms of trying to deal with the swathe of issues which are picked up in both your submissions and the material provided today, I sense, obviously, and it's reflected in the material, frustration in being able to get answers to questions that were being posed, satisfactory responses, from the government. The way you've articulated that this morning is that this is WestConnex. You couldn't get, any, response from WestConnex. I'm just trying to understand, in terms of these issues you've raised, who have you been primarily dealing with to try and get resolution on these issues? Has it been a particular person or department or office or part of WestConnex, or have you been dealing with Department of Environment and Planning?
There's a number of different people that we've tried to inform about our frustration, and I apologise that you hear the frustration that's coming through, but this is...
No, there's no need to apologise.
This is a process that's been going on for many years.
Start with WestConnex then. I'm sorry to sort of move because I've got limited time, but with respect to WestConnex, who have you been trying to bowl the issues up to get breakthrough to understand your complaints and some sort of progress on those matters?
There's always the primary source that we go to, which is the community liaison people. Then I also would send information to my local member, who was able to liaise and arrange meetings. I've had 2 prior meetings, one with the previous Minister for Planning, Mr Rob Stokes, and I've also had a meeting with the current Minister for WestConnex, Mr Stuart.
But notwithstanding what you've just described, we still find a situation where you're coming before the hearing today with a whole range of matters outstanding. I mean, where do you see this progressing from here? I mean, you've obviously done a great deal of work to try and progress these matters to a satisfactory resolution. for the complainants and the individuals involved. But it's sort of just stuck there now,
Yeah,
is it? So
that's right.
is it going to fall then to you trying to raise money and get legal representation to progress this matters? Is this where we are at the moment? I mean, how are you going to go further from where you've got now? Have you got a sort of...
We are seeking legal advice at this stage, as far as a class action is concerned, with the damage that's been incurred to a number of
You
different
talk about damage,
people.
yes.
Yes. That's the only avenue that I see left at this stage.
I mean, you feel like you've hit the wall, basically.
Well, I have, because phone calls are not being answered and emails are not being returned. I mean, that's Stonewall.
Ms. Coleman, firstly, thank you for both the calibre and the quality of your submission, your appearance today, but equally all the work that you've done, and particularly in the heightened circumstances that you personally have faced. I can only imagine how difficult it must be to be dealing with a cancer diagnosis and serious litigation with the government department. So I want to acknowledge that up front. Do you have confidence and faith in the integrity and honesty of the RMS and how they've been dealing with you?
No.
And on what basis do you have you lost your confidence?
Well, we were issued these post-dilapidation reports. There was obvious that there was damage done to our home and that of our neighbours. And we were issued a one-pager with a few photos saying, well, it doesn't seem to be much damage and you can't prove it. Or I put into my submission the exact words, but we can't confirm nor deny that we caused the damage. Basically, you prove it to us that we caused it.
And prior to you commencing litigation, by the way, has that litigation resolved?
No.
Oh, you're still in court?
Yeah, no, we haven't gone to court yet.
You haven't gone to court?
No.
Have you got a timetable?
No. It's
okay,
early days because we are collecting, I have gathered the case studies of a number of other people.
It's described, sorry, like a class action. You're describing there's a number of complaints here. There's a number of people have damaged property and they sort of through you as the vehicle trying to work through how to deal with the government. Yeah.
And it's in the district court or the Supreme Court?
Oh, I don't know. We're
you
just
don't know.
speaking to our lawyer at the moment.
Fair enough.
And they've also been dealing with quite a number of other people as well.
Prior to you and the other people who are party to the class action making the decision to sue, did you feel that RMS were perhaps eager to mediate the dispute, eager to respond, take steps short of litigation?
No, they haven't. So they invited us to a meeting and they basically told us that we're there to discuss the contents of the second post-dilapidation report. I won't mention the small operator, but
It's you.
Inglis Engineering, it's a sole operator. And that the content of the report will not change. Right. Now, we have engaged a very senior engineer at quite a considerable cost to ourselves of over $8,000. And he's very senior with 40 years experience, and he just said there are so many omissions in this additional document, such as they put the blame down to a dripping garden tap. Or it could be overflow of our water tanks, which have been there for 15 years.
But is it accurate to say that you feel like their motivation here is to simply deny liability?
That's right.
Yeah.
What they
They
missed a very important part of the Australian standard was that a likely cause of the damage in our home could be because of additional drainage. They've changed the pattern of drainage of the water flowing in the groundwater, and that's what our engineers likely put it down to.
Ms. Coleman, I've only got very limited time left. Are you aware that RMS is subject to what is called a model litigant policy, which says that when they are being sued by anyone, that they are to comply to the highest standards in terms of how they interact with the parties? That includes mediation and, to the extent possible, avoiding court action. Are you been aware of that?
They have not informed us of that. So
do you know that is enforceable on RMS?
I don't know. Yeah. I'm just a resident.
Is it a surprise to you to learn that they are meant to be following that policy?
Yes, because we've been trying to call Annie Bedrusi, which I consider as a senior RMS consultative person. She refuses to answer my telephone calls.
What's her title? Well, you understand? Well, she's a
She's an RMS,
works for RMS.
senior compliance officer, I
Okay.
think, or
Notice, are you able to provide that correspondence, the emails that you've sent that she and other people from RMS have not answered?
Yep.
And to the extent to which, Mr. English, you're able to document the times of your calls to the hotline as well, because we can take it up with RMS, given that they have told us that they've had 30,000 odd interactions and believe that they're doing a very good job. It would be most useful to have your document to be able to ask, firstly, why they have not responded to you, but equally, why aren't they following the model litigant policy when
thank you.
dealing with your class action?
Move on to the Greens representative.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify in terms of those documents, because I was going to jump on that as well. So all of the correspondence in relation to the dilapidation reports, we'd be interested to see the one-pager that you've suggested that you received from them, but also then your comprehensive engineer report. So thank you for appearing today, and it's terrible that you've had to go through this, frankly, in my opinion. Because I think we've covered a fair bit about the dilapidation report, I might just ask some questions about the wall, the construction of the some of the noise barriers and stuff that's in your submission, Mr. English. You talk about the partial installation of a Perspex noise panel on the new section of Coolangatta Road Bridge. And in your submission, you suggest that someone called Rachel E. said it was to afford visual symmetry from the carriageway for the motorists.
Yes.
Who's that person?
She's the liaison, the community liaison person, but it's also documented in their submissions there.
Liaison with who? With which department?
WestConnex.
Right.
Yes, she's one of the liaison persons.
And I
think she's the original one of the ones that we dealt with, but, they do swap and change.
So the visual symmetry from the carriageway, so essentially these are put in to make it more appealing for the motorists as opposed to the residents on the other side of the wall.
Absolutely.
Was this documented in any policy or whatever, or has Rachel just communicated with...
No. It's in their documents. It's actually, as I've quoted in my document there, it's come from the EIS. It comes from the new M5 EIS as well, where they've installed transparent noise walls all the way along for 400 metres, where the Kingsgrove interchange extends west. That's so that the motorists can have view of the trees over the golf course.
What do you have a view of?
Well, as a person walking along the pedestrian pathway there, you have a view of trucks whipping past there at 100 kilometres an hour.
And I think you said in your submission that some residents are left with like a 10-lane kind of motorway as well. That's their view.
That's right.
What was the excuse, back to the noise walls again, what was their excuse in the end to take 13 months to install those noise walls? I think they were originally 14 weeks, but pushed out to 13 months. Did they provide an excuse to you?
I recall, I can just say it was only construction delays, nothing more than that.
Ms Coleman, I'm interested in, at the beginning, in your statement, you referred to bullying and intimidation from RMS staff, I think maybe WestConnex,
WestConnex, Sydney Motorway, all the same.
Sure. Could you expand or give some examples to the committee of what you're referring to when you use those words?
Yeah. So it's more so my neighbour. She's the key one is as a woman, not a man, and she just expressed horror at being treated by WestConnex with, she felt intimidated in her own home. She was starting to feel frightened, and that she was sort of mentioned to John that in future perhaps John could be with her when they came around again, or that we all be there. She has got a husband, but he works a lot of long hours, and they can't both keep taking time off. And we've taken so much time off, one by one, just to be there. I certainly wouldn't want to be, as a woman, in a room without myself with them.
You also made mention of the fact that you've requested from WestConnex the original geotechnical reports and detailed designs as a result of the damage to your house. You've obviously had to spend $8,000, probably a lot more, but $8,000 on that independent engineer. What's been the excuse that WestConnex has provided you as residents with damage to your house as a result of whatever is going on underneath it, not providing you with that information.
Could I? Sorry to jump in. The engineer that they employed to do that second assessment, when I asked him, does he have access to those documents? He said, yes. I said to him, could you supply them to me? He said, I can't see any reason why not. Then, with consultation with WestConnex, he comes back, or I get a reply from him that he was told under no circumstances is he to pass on those documents to the residents.
That was in an email that you'll be providing
That
us?
was verbally given to me over the phone.
Thank you again for coming in and helping us with our inquiry. In your submission, the copies you gave us this morning, one of the quotes states the 1300 hotline to be connected. When you ring it, you're connected with an overseas operator who knows nothing about the situation. And if you're lucky, they call back several days later. Have you made official complaints to anyone about?
I'll take that on. So that was me calling the first time at 3:30 in the morning. The incident was that there had been a car blasting, and then we were hit with a cacophony of just these truck blastings. I don't know how many trucks there were. It's a bit hard to see. I did go out there. And so I rang the hotline. I didn't know what was going on. And a guy in Malaysia who had no idea, and he said he'd find out. And so then I was calling WestConnex. I had the community liaison person on my phone. No one got back to us till the next morning. And it wasn't until later that Mr. English found that my complaint had been watered down. And we actually have that in the submission. The complaint had been watered down to a single car horn blasting for 5 minutes. Who would complain about that? This was a small convoy of trucks. The noise was huge and it woke a suburb. There was no apology and the complaint was falsified. I put in a formal complaint to the Department of Planning after that, and it was shortly after that I recall that the current Fulton Hogan community liaison person left her job. I don't know if it's related, but she did.
Thank you. You also state that breaches of the EIS go unscrutinised, uncontested and unpunished. That's relating back to the Coolangatta Road Bridge. Could you comment on that?
Yes, there was a couple of issues in the EIS. They were stated that there would be noise walls placed on all new sections of the bridge. That hasn't happened, and when I've pointed that out to the Department of Planning, nothing has changed. There was also noise walls that were lowered, again, so that the motorists could have a symmetric view of the noise wall. That's illustrated in Figure 2 in the document. That lowering of noise walls, that was investigated by the Department of Planning and nothing changed, nothing came back. Even though that, the noise wall height had been lowered, as I said, for the sake that the motorists could have a symmetrical view of the noise wall.
That you've put that in your submission as a quote. Where'd that quote come from?
The EIS.
Yeah.
It's actually stated in the EIS as a
in
reason for
EIS.
lowering.
It doesn't say it for lowering, but for the installation of transparent noise walls.
We wish to choreograph the motorist journey with views across the golf course and through our parks. Doesn't matter about the resident, and in fact that's a breach of the RMS's own guidelines. I can't remember which particular clause that is now, but the proponent is not permitted to prioritise the motorist over residents, and I pointed that out to them in one of my submissions on the Kingsgrove M5 landscape and design, but it just gets ignored. They've installed the transparent noise walls.
And there was no further consultation.
You also state that in February 2016, unscheduled work was carried out on the North GR on-ramp.
Yep.
How would you know it's unscheduled?
That was the incident that Ms Cowan was talking about then, where they blocked off the ramp and and that's what caused the delay for those trucks for that 20 minutes at 3:30 in the morning. There was no notification given to the residents that there was going to be night work on that particular night, and I presume that any type of night work that was being conducted needed to go out to the residents to let them know, inform them, as they are on a weekly basis now at the new M5. As speaking to some of the residents over there, their night work is going on 6 nights a week, and they get an information sheet every week to say, more night work, 6 nights a week.
You also stated that the March 2016 compliance report of the event we're talking about bore no resemblance to the actual event,
Yes.
that the facts were distorted. So that's someone from where? From the department? From
Yes, that would be the
WestConnex?
community liaison person from WestConnex,
Fulton Hogan.
Fulton Hogan.
Yeah.
They did the compliance report. Well, they had reported it as a 5-minute single horn blast from a single disgruntled motorist, and it wasn't. I mean, we all went and viewed it from the bridge, and you could see that there were half a dozen trucks sitting there blasting their horns while a fella had blocked off that particular lane because they were doing work on the retaining wall to the side of that lane.
And so that went on for about 40 minutes.
No. That was 20 to 30 minutes.
Yeah,
20 to 30
that's a
minutes.
typing mistake.
The unscheduled work went on for 40 work.
Oh, no.
Yes. Maybe if that's what it says, yeah, but the horn blasting went on for 20 to 30 minutes. Yeah.
Thank you. We'll move on to the government.
Thanks
Doctor.
very much, Chair. Mr English, when was the Beverly Hills North Progress Association formed?
That was formed by a group of residents prior to me moving in. We moved in there in late 1999. The Progress Association had already been formed by a few residents there. My main consultation with that was a fellow by the name of Graham Peake. He was the previous chair of Beverly Hills North Progress Association.
Okay, so the Sutherland and St George and Sutherland Shire leader of the 7th of June 2015, which interviewed you, was incorrect when it stated that it had only been recently formed.
That would be incorrect.
That would be incorrect. Okay,
Yes.
thanks very much. How many members are there in your association?
On the back of that there, we let it drop over 500 homes. We have 50 people on our email list, and we have regular meetings with 7 different community representatives.
No, my question was how many members are there of the association?
Well, I would associate those 7 people who attend those meetings as members.
So 7 people. Okay, thanks very much. Aside from WestConnex property concerns, what other measures of progress does your organisation advocate for?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
Aside from opposition to WestConnex, what other matters does your organisation actively advocate for?
We advocate for community safety, as well as the safety and the facilities for the children of that community.
Do you have a Facebook page for the Beverly Hills North Progress Association?
No.
No. Do you administer the WestConnex Action Group Beverly Hills / Kingsgrove Facebook page?
I do, but I haven't done that for quite a while now since I've been ill.
Okay. So clearly you don't have a Facebook page about a Progress Association, but you do administer an anti-WestConnex Facebook page. Is that correct?
Did.
Thank you.
I don't.
No.
Ms. Kalman, when you speak about our home, what are you referring to? Who's the our in our home?
Mine and Mr English.
So you live together?
Yep.
Thank you very much. Mr English, did you receive a complimentary property condition survey from Sydney Motorway Corporation?
You mean a...
Was that the one-pager to which you were referring to?
Is that the pre or post construction?
This is a complimentary property condition survey from SMC.
I don't know of it of that name.
Did you receive anything from SNC in relation to your property condition?
We received a pre and post dilapidation report.
Which was assessing the condition of your property?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. What did that first report say?
Well, it was quite long. I have it in my bag there if you'd like to have a look. But there's many, many photographs that were taken. That's most of the reason for the pre-construction or the pre-construction dilapidation report. There were, I think, about 50 residents from around that area that also had pre and post dilapidation reports. Actually, there have been less post dilapidation reports because a number of them weren't followed up afterwards.
Did you receive a further property conditions survey from the firm Inglis Engineering?
Yes.
Was that report of the order of 180 pages in length from an engineer who had at least 20 years' experience in the industry?
Most of those pages would have been photographs of the damage that had been incurred.
So you did receive a 180-page report?
I don't know if it was 180 pages. I haven't counted them. I have it in my bag.
What did that report say?
In context, in summary, it summarised the fact, a number of things. It had said things such as that it was likely that the excavation had gone through the water table and had altered the water flow of the water table. This is within 30 metres of our property and 25 metres of the property that is beside us that has also incurred damage.
Did Inglis Engineering ever request a meeting with you to discuss the report after it was prepared?
Inglis Engineering did not. The liaison person from WestConnex had. We were unavailable at that particular time. We were in Queensland, and I got a phone call when I was there. I said that we couldn't attend any meeting at that particular time, but I have always said that I'd be happy to talk to that particular meeting.
Were you unhappy with Inglis Engineering's report on your property?
I was unhappy with the summation that they had made, simply because in passing that particular document on to other engineers, they have said that there are significant discrepancies in there or omissions that were in there, mostly to the fact that it surmised that we were outside the zone of influence, but yet there was nothing that was conducted as to determine what was the zone of influence.
If you were unhappy with the report and you did not wish to discuss it, did you ever think about commissioning your own report in relation to your property?
That we have done.
Okay.
I didn't say that we didn't want to discuss it. At no stage is that not up for discussion, because we were unavailable to discuss it. They did go and confront our neighbour about it, who got quite annoyed about having to go again in order to take more time off, so that she would have said in the end, possibly in her emails, that she might have said, I'm sick of this, I don't want to carry on anymore with these incursions into my particular situation. But I had not said that I did not want to discuss that any further. The question that they had asked me was to go and explain the report. I knew what was already in the report. I didn't need to have it explained to me. But I have commissioned another independent engineer to look into that.
Okay. In relation to this new report, the one you've commissioned, have you ever shown this report to RMS or to Fulton Hogan?
No, they have requested that. When I say they, that is the Department of Planning have requested that. Fulton Hogan or the RMS have not requested that.
Why haven't you sent it in if it's the basis of your complaint?
Yeah. It is a matter of experience that whenever we have gone to the Department of Planning and requested something and supplied them with documents, they have come back with a summation that is exactly the same as the RMS.
Okay.
Say, for example, their conclusion with the Inglis report. At no stage does it say in the Inglis report that it was not their fault. That is, it was not WestConnex's fault. It doesn't state that.
Okay, but if the basis of your contention is that the Inglis Engineering report is faulty and your report is correct, why haven't you, prior to the threat of legal action, not presented RMS with the facts as you see them?
Okay. I wouldn't put it that way. I wouldn't say one is correct and one is faulty, or either way. I have pointed out that the Inglis report had omissions that were within it. Our engineering report cannot finish his report. He said to us, I cannot come up with any degree of certainty as the cause of damage on your case. I can say that there is a degree of uncertainty, but the problem is that we don't have access, and I can't get access to those documents that I've put in there that Inglis Engineering had access to, and our engineer does not. So he comes up with, I am uncertain.
Okay. In your submission, you refer to an incident about trucks blowing their horns repeatedly for some time back in 2016.
Yep.
And that was due to inadequate signposting.
Yeah, they
sorry,
didn't block the road.
They blocked the road, yes.
Were you the individual who made that complaint?
I was one of several.
Was the signage issue ever resolved?
I think, well, we might be talking on different terms. The signage for the motorist, it was temporary signage that the on-ramp had been closed and they'd blocked it off.
Okay.
That's the end of,
That's my time.
that's the end of the session.
Reverend, just to be clear, Ms. Cummin, in the questioning from Dr. Phelps, he characterised the group that you're associated with, or one of the groups, as an anti-WestConnex group.
It's
No,
a
let
community.
me finish. That's what he put to you. It was an anti-WestConnex group. It was a rather quick comment. Would you like to comment on that further? Is that a correct characterisation of the group that he referred to?
No. So the Beverly Hills North Progress Association is all about making it better for the community. So the stance of this association was about working with WestConnex in order to just give back to the community what they've lost. So we had 12 hectares of park that has been seconded by WestConnex. Only 2 will be returned. And our own experience with the landscape and design and the urban repair is that it's just not good enough for the ongoing inconvenience, the dust, the noise, the stress, the ugliness is what gets returned to us.
And that,
We have to move on. I'm sorry.
Well,
I'm sorry.
can I just,
Time is up.
with respect, you've sought to suggest that my line of questioning is
I haven't finished mine.
not been fair.
Further.
Is this actually written on the website which you have administered previously? This community page is managed by representatives of the Beverly Hills North Progress Association as a means of communicating updates, concerns and views of the WestConnex M5 project. This community is united with all electorates that are impacted by this toxic waste of money.
No, it's a Facebook page on WestConnex by a
We don't have,
Administered by them.
What is the point?
we don't have a...
Well, you say that you're not a WestConnex group and you
Handle.
describe it as a toxic waste of money. Are you sure that you're not a opposition to WestConnex group?
We are a community group that is We've lived through the first M5 and we were promised, as at the opening statement, we were promised that it was going to take traffic off local roads. We were promised that the unfiltered exhaust stack was safe. We were promised that that you could leave your windows open in the M5 and it was safe. And so we've had multiple parliamentary inquiries. The stack at Torella is in the valley of Torella is just unfiltered pumping diesel exhaust into the community in Elwood above. Our urban environment, though promised, was never repaired. We did it. We put together a gardening thing, bought our own plants and planted them and then watered it through the severe drought of the year 2000. We beautified our environment because that's where we live and we loved our home. So we are trying to work together with our residents, and out of this one, I have met the most wonderful elderly people. They don't have access to computers, but I think I'm the only visitor sometimes. That's what it's done.
We thank you very much for your submissions and for information you've supplied. I'm not sure whether you want to table any of those other reports
That's
or
only
whether the
submissions.
committee needs them. Do we need any of those documents? You said he had his reports.
I think just if we
No,
to be
the ones
clear
in
that
his
they
bag.
have formally already tabled them was my understanding.
Yeah.
The
That's
ones in his
clear.
bag.
Once presented
Yes,
this
and
morning.
it's up to us to decide whether we publish. Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you again. And any questions on notice, you have 21 days to answer the question if you can. from the time the
Very much.
Secretary gives you
Thank
the
you.
question. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you for your time. We really appreciate it.
Going to be witnesses at our hearing. We appreciate your attendance. Could each witness now please state their name and position title and swear either an oath or affirmation, and those documents are in front of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My name is James George Betts. I'm CEO of Infrastructure New South Wales. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Marina Grobbelaar. I'm currently acting in the Head of Assurance role and Deputy CEO at Infrastructure New South Wales. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
You haven't made a submission to the inquiry. You're making opening statements now?
If I may make a short opening statement, Chair, that would be great.
And any reason why you have not made a submission?
We were happy for RMS to provide the main background submission to the committee.
Okay.
Context.
Sorry, just before, you've seen that submission though?
Yes, yes, it's in the public domain. It's on the website.
Good. Could we have your opening statement then? Thank you.
Yes, certainly. I'll try to keep it brief. As we've just noted, RMS have already provided a submission to the committee and provided evidence earlier this week, as I understand it. But I thought it might be helpful to the committee if I was to provide you with a brief explanation of the role that Infrastructure New South Wales has played in relation to WestConnex and related projects over the years. And there are four main functions, four main roles that we've performed. The first relates to our statutory function, which I'm happy to describe in more detail, around the production, at least every 5 years, of a state infrastructure strategy which advises the government of the day on what we regard as an independent body as the long-term infrastructure investment priorities for the state. The first state infrastructure strategy was produced in 2012, before I was the CEO of the organisation, before I came on the scene. And it's fair to say that that strategy, which was entitled First Things First, identified WestConnex as one of the highest investment priorities for the recently elected government. In proposing WestConnex, Infrastructure New South Wales at the time put on its website a 30-page document which it characterised as a feasibility study, which included a target cost for the project of around $10 billion and had a very preliminary estimate of the benefit cost ratio for the project of 1.5. but it identified the next steps as being the production of concept designs, the assessment of options, and the production of a business case. So it's fair to say that in 2012 it was a pretty preliminary piece of analysis from Infrastructure New South Wales. The next time we produced a state infrastructure strategy was at the request of the then Premier in 2014, by which stage the WestConnex project was underway. And at that point, we flagged the need for the government to consider some augmentations to the motorway network, including the Western Harbour Tunnel and the Gateway project to connect to the airport and the port, and to bring forward business cases for those. The second function that Infrastructure New South Wales performs, which is relevant, which has already, I think, been touched on in evidence from government representatives previously, is around our administration of the Infrastructure Investor Assurance Framework, which provides independent advice to the Cabinet on how major projects are travelling across government. That framework was established, and Infrastructure New South Wales was put in charge of it in the light of an Auditor General's review of WestConnex in late 2014. And we're happy to describe in detail the processes that we follow for external assurance of major projects, including WestConnex, and the framework itself is documented and is on our website. As I said before, the predominant purpose of our reviews and our advice is to inform Cabinet, and as such our findings are covered by Cabinet in confidence, and I'm as constrained by that as anybody else. But I can tell you that we've undertaken no fewer than 36 reviews on the different aspects of WestConnex, and we review it on a regular basis. Happy to discuss the framework in more detail. A third function we perform is, on behalf of the New South Wales Government, liaison with the Commonwealth. And that includes Infrastructure Australia, which is our national equivalent sister body. And Infrastructure Australia publishes business case evaluation summaries for projects which are put to it for consideration by states and territories. And there are two such evaluations related to WestConnex on the Infrastructure Australia website, one relating to the 2014 business case and the other to the updated business case that was produced by the government in 2016. Both of those summaries, coming from the national independent infrastructure body, express high degrees of confidence that the benefits of the project exceed the costs. Some commentary around the need to sharpen up some of the cost assessments and some of the traffic modelling in the first incarnation of the business case, but substantially addressed in the second, according to Infrastructure Australia. And the final function, just to wrap up, is our administration of the Restart New South Wales Fund, which is a statutory fund established in 2011, into which the proceeds of major asset recycling has occurred. $1.8 billion from that fund was allocated to WestConnex in October 2013, and then sometime later, at the back end of 2015, just over $15 million was allocated for early development work on the Sydney Gateway project. So that's a summary of the functions that Infrastructure New South Wales performs, and obviously happy to take any questions.
And could you table that opening statement?
I'm afraid it's some fairly scrappy notes that I've been reading from, but I'd be happy to provide those.
Or anything that you have.
Well, we would appreciate that, even that.
We can read scrappy notes.
Yeah,
Okay.
we love scrappy notes.
We specialise in that.
Authenticity.
And your associate, do you wish to make any opening statement?
No, thank you.
Could you just briefly explain what your role is, Head of Investor Assurance?
And Deputy CEO at Infrastructure New South Wales.
So Marina is my deputy responsible for the assurance process, which is the review of all the major projects being developed and delivered by the New South Wales Government, and the provision of advice to the Cabinet on how those projects are travelling. That's the subset of our functions.
So she's the head and she advises you?
Correct. Marina reports to me.
Ongoing
She's my
reviews.
deputy.
Yes,
ongoing reviews, regular reports. It's all set out in the Investor Assurance Framework, which we're happy to describe to you.
We'll move on to the opposition questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Betts and Ms. Grobler for your appearance today, and thank you, Mr. Betts, for the comprehensive nature of your detail about Infrastructure New South Wales' involvement in the project. Just to conclude that, though, Infrastructure New South Wales did produce a 2018 Strategic Infrastructure Strategy as well.
Yes.
That's correct. So it was 2012, 2014, 2018.
Correct.
And you've produced 36 reviews of the project under the assurance framework since its inception. That's
yes,
correct.
that's right.
And when was the last one?
I'd have to check my notes on that. It would be relatively recently.
Probably still on foot, Jim.
Yes. So we review each of the subcomponents of the WestConnex project. and we do that on a regular basis, including at least every 6 months. For
Bess, do you just mind moving the larger microphone closer to you?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
What involvement did you, Infrastructure New South Wales, have in the preparation of the original business case? Is it the case that RMS produced it and you assessed it under the Infrastructure New South Wales Assurance Framework?
No, it's the case. It's certainly the case that it was produced by. I think it was produced by the WestConnex Delivery Authority, which was a special purpose.
They were the
vehicle.
sponsor agency.
Yes, they were.
And you assessed it under the Infrastructure Investor Assurance?
No, we didn't, because
it
at that stage it didn't exist.
Yeah.
The Infrastructure Investor Assurance Framework was established in the light of the findings of the Auditor General, as I said in my notes. The date is in my notes, which I no longer got. And over the year that followed that, we progressively established the assurance framework, which is now mature.
And the updated strategic business case that was produced in November 2015, that was produced by, at that time, RMS. That's correct, because the WestConnex Delivery Authority had ceased to exist.
You may well be right.
And they were the sponsor agency, and you assessed it the way you would any project that is being presented to you under that framework. That's correct.
Well, the Investor Assurance Framework was established progressively from mid-2015 to mid-2016, so I'd have to, I'm not...
Yes, but either way...
We actually did do a review on that.
It may have been assessed under the Transport for New South Wales Assurance Framework in the absence of...
that would be the alternative.
That would be the alternative, that's correct. And in the updated strategic business case in November 2015, the Sydney Gateway was considered to be part of the WestConnex project. That accords with your understanding?
Yes, so I think, as I understand it, some $800 million was earmarked to provide a connection between the St Peters interchange and the airport and port.
And in the assurances that you've undertaken since 2016, when the Investor Insurance Framework has been in place till date, how many times have you insured the gateway component of the project?
Several times. I mean, the detail of that is cabinet in confidence, but we have undertaken a number of reviews of Gateway during that time. So
when did you start assuring the Gateway project as a separate project from the WestConnex?
It was recorded as a separate project from WestConnex from September 2017.
September 2017.
Correct.
And can you explain why, therefore, RMS has said to us that they started considering it as a separate project in 2015 if it was removed in September 2017? And given that it is your responsibility to assure on behalf of the taxpayers of New South Wales, very interested to see why you had to wait so long before you had to start assessing it as a separate project.
Okay, so the question is whether it was assessed as a separate project. It would have previously been assessed as being part of the suite of WestConnex projects. And I think the answer to that is that to set it in the context of WestConnex overall, WestConnex is effectively a 10-year program of investments, and those investments have been progressively procured and constructed in a staged way, and it's also fair to say that those investments have been planned in a staged way.
Yes, and that's, to be fair to you, that's also what you outlined, Infrastructure New South Wales outlined in its 2014 infrastructure strategy, and pretty much similar to in your 2012 strategy as well.
Yes, so that's right. So if I could just finish that point, however, because I think it might shed some light. The initial provision was for $800 million in that 2015 business case to provide a connection. But the planning in detail of that connection through to the airport and the port was at the back end of the process of planning of all the different packages of WestConnex. That was the most recent one that the government turned its mind to, if I could finish. And we allocated, as I said, $15 million to enable that planning work to occur. But it became apparent to government that $800 million, the provision in WestConnex, could provide connectivity to the port and the airport. But actually it was so strategically significant that the project should effectively be treated as a mega project in its own right. And not just including a motorway standard connection to the airport, but also including the duplication of the Port Botany rail line, which is one of the identified by Infrastructure Australia as one of the most critical projects in the country. So the project has evolved from being a subset of WestConnex and $800 million into a fully fledged project which stands on its own strategic merits.
Thank you, Mr. Spence. I don't wish to rush you, but I do have limited time. But September 2017 is effectively when Infrastructure New South Wales starts treating it as a separate project for assurance purposes.
Yes.
That's the summary. Moving on, the Gateway project is, we're told by RMS that a final business case has been prepared. Is that correct?
Yes.
And we're told that a final investment decision has not been undertaken. That's correct as well.
I don't want to go into the details of cabinet processes,
Okay.
but that's not far off the mark. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have a anticipation as to when Infrastructure New South Wales will be in a position to publish a business case summary for the Gateway?
That would be up to government, but the standard process is that within, I think, 4 months of an investment decision being taken, we routinely publish business case summaries.
Okay. In terms of the Gateway, does the current proposal for the Gateway connect to Port Botany?
There is connectivity, obviously, through to Port Botany at the moment. The principal focus of the upgrade, as I understand it,
Rail
is to provide
connectivity.
Is rail connectivity.
The road connectivity in the existing proposal?
There is significantly upgraded road connectivity to the airport, but it is fair to say that the Gateway project as currently conceived does not represent the final word on road connectivity to the port, and further work will be undertaken in the normal course of events to plan progressive upgrades to road connections to the port.
Okay, so but in
WestConnex
2014...
Gateway and WestConnex have never purported to be the final solution to every road or transport issue in Sydney, so there will always be unfinished business. It will always be with us.
But it's fair to say that in 2014, Infrastructure New South Wales, very helpfully in its State Infrastructure Strategy, published a map in which it showed that there was meant to be road connectivity to Port Botany. Road connectivity?
Watch the trucks go along Foreshore Road.
Yes, I used to represent those truck drivers, so I'm quite familiar with them, and a lot of them. So my question to you is why does it not now go to the port the way it was envisaged in the 2014 strategy?
Well, there is road connectivity to the port, as I've described. The port will benefit very significantly from the wider network upgrade which WestConnex and which the Gateway project both produce, including connectivity between the port and all the growing areas of Western Sydney. So the port is a very significant beneficiary from both projects as they currently stand. However, it would be fair to say that there will continue to be a focus on the need to provide further upgrades to road connectivity to the port.
Well, we're paying now $2.6 billion for it, and we do not have direct road connectivity to the port.
Well, you do have direct road. How do you think the trucks get into the port at the moment?
Mr. Betts, you need to let me finish the question.
I'd like you to ask questions, Mr. Betts.
Just let me finish the question, and then you can tell me why I'm wrong. But we are not providing road connectivity through the Gateway. We're doing it through a rail thing. That's correct.
Yeah, the Gateway project
So
is...
in 2014, we envisaged, in fact, your document that your agency produced said that there'd be road connectivity through the Gateway and rail connectivity through the Gateway, if you want to be strictly accurate. We now have rail, but we don't have road. It's costing us $2.6 billion. It's not going to Port Botany. Port Botany was the original justification. I'm asking you as the independent agency, have you been provided reasons for why it's not doing that anymore?
The principal focus of the project has been to provide upgraded access at motorway standard directly to the airport. The port will significantly benefit from the project. There is scope for further upgrades to connectivity to the port, and Infrastructure New South Wales would, at a strategic level, support those investments being investigated, documented and ultimately funded by the government.
Treasury says that the Port Botany, the Gateway, the state government component of the Gateway, which is not the rail line, that's the road part to the airport, will be paid for out of consolidated revenue. Does that accord with your understanding?
I don't think the government's taken a decision that I'm aware of on whether it would come out of consolidated revenue as against restart.
Well, Treasury was very clear about this. We asked them point blank, is it coming from consolidated revenue? In fact, I think they volunteered that it was coming from consolidated revenue. Does that accord with your understanding?
If Treasury say that, then I'm happy to be guided by the record.
If it is the case that it is coming from consolidated revenue, it is correct to say, therefore, that the legislative requirement of the Restart New South Wales Act for the to have a benefit cost ratio more than one will not apply. That's an accurate statement. Isn't that correct?
That's right. There would be no requirement related to Restart for it to have a BCI of greater than 1 if it doesn't come out of Restart. That's true of any investment the government makes which isn't funded from Restart.
Of course. And moving on, in your 2014 infrastructure strategy, you said that Infrastructure New South Wales recommends that Transport for New South Wales should develop a business case for the Western Harbour Tunnel by the end of 2015 to enable the project's procurement and delivery as a tollway with or immediately after the delivery of WestConnex Stage 3. Has that, given that you called for it to be completed so we can contemplate whether it should connect to WestConnex, has the strategic business case, or the final business case for the Western Harbour Tunnel been completed?
Yeah.
And is it public?
No, because the government hasn't yet taken a final investment decision on Western Harbour Tunnel.
Yeah. In your state infrastructure strategy this year, you make a point about, well, actually, in 2014 strategies, you make a point about the F6 also connecting to WestConnex. That's correct, 2014?
Correct.
Yeah, has the F6...
Yeah, to WestConnex, yeah, that's correct.
Has the F6 business case, final business case been completed?
Yes, and the summary published on our website.
Yeah, but not yet a final investment decision has not yet been made.
Yeah, final investment decision has in fact been taken.
About the F6 extension?
F6 stage 1, yes.
You say in this year's state infrastructure strategy that infrastructure strategy considers the F6 extension and Beaches Link both need to be weighed carefully against other potential government sector investments. In a constrained fiscal environment, a near-term decision to invest in these new weighted conventions serving the Eastern Harbour City may mean deferral of projects elsewhere in Greater Sydney, which may have greater city-shaping impacts. Which projects were you referring to when you say that the Eastern Harbour City may mean deferral of projects elsewhere in Greater Sydney? And does that include the Gateway?
It includes any project elsewhere in the city in a constrained fiscal environment. The statement is one of arithmetic fact that in a constrained fiscal environment, if you invest in project X, then that ties up the capital, which is no longer available to invest in project Y. So the choice for government, the strategic choice for this government and for future governments will be whether you invest in worthwhile projects to address constraints, congestion, etc. in the established Eastern Harbour City, or whether you give priority to the investment in more city-shaping projects in the central central river city around Parramatta and the Olympic Peninsula, or even in the longer term around Badgerys Creek and the Western Parkland City. Those are just the choices government faces.
Of course.
But you can't have your cake and eat it. You can't fund every worthwhile project immediately.
I agree with that, and hence I'm asking you in respect to particularly the Western Metro, which has to coincide with WestConnex on White Bay. Is there an impact now that you're referring to when you say that it's going to lead to the deferral of projects elsewhere in Greater Sydney, which may have greater city shipping impacts?
To be honest, you'd have to ask people in Treasury who'd have a better sense than I do about what the available capital is over the medium and long term, because when I say in a constrained fiscal environment, you'd have to know how constrained the fiscal environment was, and you'd need to know the price tag of those projects to make that equation meaningful.
Well, I'll hope to get Treasury back to ask them. One of the big themes that is coming through here is the choice to invest in WestConnex at the expense of public transport. Does the Western Metro have a greater benefit-cost ratio than WestConnex?
I can't answer that question because the final business case for the Western Metro won't be completed until the end of this year. At that point, we will have the information.
The Greens, Kate Fielding.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Betts, what percentage of the New South Wales transport budget should be spent on active transport infrastructure, according to Infrastructure New South Wales?
I don't think that we have ever identified a specific percentage that should be spent on active transport. I think we regard active transport as being a critical part of the equation. We want more people to be walking and cycling. We want active transport to be embedded in every major piece of infrastructure that Transport for New South Wales and RMS invest in, but I don't think expressing it as a percentage is something that we've ever previously done.
Have you got KPIs in that area then? You just said it should be embedded in every piece of transport, transport infrastructure. Do you have KPIs that are being met?
Well, it's a matter of policy for the government to ensure that active transport options are included in all business cases for major transport investments.
So active transport is included in every single piece of infrastructure.
It needs to be considered. It's obviously a decision for government about exactly what the scope of each individual project is at the end. But there are a number of policy priorities identified in our state infrastructure strategy, including in relation to things like health, including in relation to priorities like childhood obesity, that lead us to the conclusion that walking, cycling and other forms of active transport are a critical part of the mix. So we'd be very supportive of that.
During your opening statement, you suggested that, talked about Infrastructure New South Wales in 2012 identifying WestConnex at that time as the highest priority. Is that correct?
It was certainly a very high priority. I'm not sure whether we ever said it was the highest, but they may have been before my time.
Jotted that down, and that's here as well in your opening statement. Was there an options paper considered in terms of what WestConnex was aiming to achieve in terms of the public interest? Was there an options paper presented that WestConnex seemed to beat all the other options on?
Well, that was the business case that was subsequently produced in 2013 and updated in 2015.
The business case didn't have, it was pretty light on though in terms of alternatives, suggesting that it was, I mean, generally there's an options paper with serious consideration given to rail, for example, mass transit, to accommodate this. That wasn't considered in this case, was it?
Well, the business case is, has been published in summary form, and I think you've reached your own conclusion on that. But when you, I mean, WestConnex is a project which will be heavily used by public transport. Roads are not a mode of transport, so investing in motorways doesn't necessarily preclude investment in public transport. You need a complementary mix of having a decent road network, so for instance buses can get from A to B. And it would also be fair to say that WestConnex and road-related investments like that need to be seen in the broader context of other investments, like for instance Sydney Metro, which is an even bigger program of investment than WestConnex and is all about mass transit.
Mr. Betts, though, for massive projects such as this, I think the biggest project of its kind in the country, 17.8 billion or 17 billion, whatever it is now.
17.8.
At what they're saying, plus all the other associated costs in terms of everything else that's going on around it, plus the gateway and everything.
Big project.
Are you saying that Infrastructure New South Wales should not request that there should be alternatives that the government offers for a spend of $17 billion, alternatives to get such as mass transit?
Absolutely, alternatives should be considered. So if you'd like me to talk about the investor assurance framework, I can talk about the way in which that is structured.
What were the alternatives?
So I'm afraid I can't speak to the historic record of what might have been done before Infrastructure New South Wales established the investor assurance framework, but our framework requires agencies who wish to secure investment in major infrastructure to complete what's called a strategic business case, which we then independently review. And the purpose of that strategic business case is precisely to identify the problem which the project purports, or the proponent purports to be addressing, and the full range of options available to address that. And in this case, that would include mass transit options, it would include regulatory options, pricing options.
So what were the other full range of options that the government presented instead of WestConnex? Other options, what were they in the strategic business case?
Well, there wasn't a strategic business case that was produced for WestConnex, as I understand it. It was a business case that was produced before our framework was in place.
Yes, so the feasibility study. So I'm just a bit confused in terms of what the options were that were presented. So what were the alternatives to this $16.8 billion project where we've had residents talking to us about all of the impacts, distressed, having to sell their homes, acquisition. Sorry, what were the alternatives that Infrastructure New South Wales assessed?
I've already explained to you that Infrastructure New South Wales didn't, because at that stage when the WestConnex business case was brought forward, Infrastructure New South Wales was not responsible for assurance.
Let me reframe the question, sorry, not in terms of assessed. Let me reframe that. So what were the other alternatives or options that the government had in an options paper feasibility study? Were there other alternatives presented?
Well, there's a comprehensive state infrastructure strategy which identified all the different transport challenges that were facing Sydney.
If there's no other alternatives that they offered or no options, Mr. Betts, just say so. Is that the case?
So to the extent, if the problem that is attempting to be solved is the fact that Parramatta Road is a road which is subject to extreme delay, then a key part of the solution to that is to provide for improved motorway standard access through tunnels. And that was complemented in the original conception of the project and is complemented now by the opportunity to provide for enhanced public transport on the surface.
Let me ask it a different way. So in your history of assessing big road projects such as this, and perhaps you, Ms. Grobbelaar, may also want to respond to this, is it usual for a government, if they're going to put forward a proposal such as this, say $15 billion of taxpayers' money on a one solution that they say is a solution to a problem, such as congested roads, is it the usual practice to provide a list of other alternatives to that problem, such as other transport options?
Yeah, I think our gateway workbooks are available online, and it's very clearly stating that strategic options, Gate 1 strategic options workbook, that all alternatives, as Mr. Bates mentioned, needs to be considered. And,
So they weren't
and
considered in this
analysed.
case then,
Just
all
to-
alternatives?
Just to repeat what Jim had said, we did not assure that business case, so we would not have considered the business case in the context of our gateway.
So we can't speak to the detail of the options that were considered, which was by RMS at the time.
River Null.
Because it's really what the government would have considered options.
Well, the purpose of business cases is to identify a range of different options. I imagine that a whole range of different engineering solutions were canvassed to try and improve traffic flows, try and improve access into the port and the airport, to try and alleviate congestion on Parramatta Road and on the M5. But I also get the sense that the question goes to whether completely different radical alternatives were considered in terms of public transport access into the central part of the city. And of course they were, and they were pursued through other projects like the multi-billion-dollar metro project, like the light rail project and so on.
From that part of Western Sydney?
Western Sydney is a huge beneficiary of public transport investment through projects like Sydenham to Bankstown through the North West Rail Link, and there's $20 billion worth of investment I've mentioned just there.
Western Metro.
Good, thank you very much. There seems to be some confusion about access to Port Botany. Could you just clarify that people are driving to Port Botany?
Yeah, well, we know that Port Botany is functioning.
And name them.
Port Botany is a rapidly growing container port and is a very successful freight logistics operation. And as our population grows and our demand for goods, particularly imported manufactured goods, increase, then the volume of containerised traffic going through Port Botany increases.
MUA all the way.
Especially since we're not letting Newcastle compete for it.
So Newcastle would be a completely inadequate alternative to Port Botany, whereas I would argue that Port Kembla, if you want a long...
Contractually prohibited.
Not
Point of
prohibited.
order, Mr.
When you're ready, I'll answer your question.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
If you finish, could you finish your answer?
I'll try.
Directed at you guys.
Interruptions.
So there is a functioning road connection to Port Botany at the moment, which is why Port Botany is a rapidly growing and functioning container port. The focus of the Sydney Gateway project, as announced by the government, has been to provide motorway standard access to the airport, but that in no way precludes longer-term options to improve the immediate access in the immediate vicinity of the port, nor does it mean that the port will not benefit very significantly from the cross-town connectivity which the overall WestConnex scheme will provide. The fact that you can provide much more reliable cross-town access for trucks enables a reconfiguration of the industrial geography of Sydney such that businesses which, for instance, logistics businesses which have had to been closely located to the port in the past can now move out to cheaper land and operate more economically, confident that they will have a functioning M4, M5 and link between the two to enable them to get to the port from across the Sydney Basin. So the port is a huge beneficiary of this. That doesn't mean that that every issue related to access to the port has been resolved by this one project.
And is it also clear now about the access to the airport?
Yes. So this is the Gateway project has resolved for the very long term now the question of road access into the airport, and that's a huge piece of the jigsaw strategically for Sydney, which has now been settled.
Good, thank you. In your opening statement, you made reference to a 30-page feasibility study.
Yes.
Could you just clarify what that was, and is it possible to table that?
Yes, certainly. So that was a document that was produced by Infrastructure New South Wales with a number of other agencies in 2012, and it's on our website and is available for anybody to access and to read. But it was very much a preliminary assessment of the transport challenges associated with constraints on the M4 and the M5 and indeed on existing harbour crossings, and made the very preliminary case for WestConnex, recommended that the government of the day take that high-level document, produce the concept designs and undertake the economic analysis and engineering optioneering to produce a business case, which was done the following year in 2013, as I've described.
Thank you. In your notes, your handwritten notes under assurance, you have a reference to 36 previous to date findings.
Yep.
Could you just clarify those
Yes.
reviews?
So the Investor Assurance Framework, which Ms Grobbelaar oversees on behalf of Infrastructure New South Wales, provides for Infrastructure New South Wales to provide external scrutiny for Cabinet of all the major projects being developed and delivered across New South Wales. And we focus on projects which are over $10 million in value, and it's pleasing to be able to say there are over 500 such projects in development or delivery in New South Wales at the moment. We're going through an unprecedented boom in infrastructure investment. And at key points along the way, in accordance with that framework, whether it's at the strategic business case stage when we're referring to options, which we were talking about earlier, it's at the final business case stage when an investment decision is about to be taken and we have a fully developed proposal like we do with Gateway at the moment, points along the way in terms of procurement and delivery. Infrastructure New South Wales convenes panels of experts from across Australia to review all the key documentation, to talk to the project teams, to talk to other key stakeholders across government and produce advice through us to Cabinet on how those projects are travelling and any actions that need to be taken to ensure that the projects are delivered on time and on budget. And that note that you have in front of you there, Reverend Niall, refers to the fact that no fewer than 36 separate reviews have been undertaken on different components of WestConnex over the last 3 years, which shows the level of rigour and scrutiny which is being directed at this project so that Cabinet can be very well informed about its competent delivery.
Good, thank you. We move on to the government members.
Sorry.
Mr. Feng.
Thank you, Mr. Betts. I noted when you were responding to a question from Ms. Furman that you offered to expand on the investor insurance framework, and I note that in your previous answer to the Reverend, you had done so, but I'll give you that opportunity now for the benefit of the committee. Can you expand a little bit further on that? And Ms. Grobbelaar, can you explain the work that's gone into the 36 investigations into the WestConnex project?
So I think just to respond to that and to set the context, I want to reiterate that the advice that we prepare is advice for Cabinet. Mm-hmm. So every month I front up to the Cabinet Infrastructure Committee and provide advice to the Premier, the Infrastructure Minister and other key ministers on how the full range of projects across New South Wales are travelling. So the dominant purpose of the Investor Assurance Framework is to provide advice to Cabinet, which means that neither of us are able to disclose the details of the reviews and the findings that we undertake because they are covered by Cabinet in confidence. And that's been the convention under successive governments around Australia, governments around the world. That's just the way government operates, and that enables government to have honest, open conversations internally. And that's in accordance with rules set by this Parliament, not set by me.
Is that like a dashboard process?
So we would provide summary form information to ministers about how projects are travelling and enable them to have informed discussions about the actions that then need to be taken to ensure that projects are brought back on track and to have early warnings if there are issues that are emerging. As I said, we use experts from around Australia, so if we were undertaking a review on Sydney Gateway or on a WestConnex component of the project, we would assemble all the key documentation, which might be a business case or it might be some request for tender or some other relevant documentation. We would convene experts from around the country who would have experience in delivering major projects. So we've used experts from Victoria who've worked on projects like CityLink and EastLink. And people with deep experience in the sector, and we would bring them to New South Wales, and we use people who've worked in New South Wales previously. It's not just about people from interstate, and over several days enable them to have access to all the key data and to interrogate that and to ask what the risk profile of the project is and really try and dig out the things that we need to be focusing on to make sure that we and the agency in particular that's accountable for the delivery of the project can do the best possible job. And this is a regime which was established, as I said, in 2015 in response to some findings from the Auditor General. It's similar regimes have applied in the UK and in Victoria and in Queensland, but in New South Wales we have a far more fully developed regime than anywhere else in the world, and much more detailed and rigorous reporting to ministers than anywhere else in the world. And as I said, I can't go into the details of the projects, but by and large, we see that the infrastructure program in New South Wales is being delivered extremely effectively at the moment. There are some projects which are under pressure, and so they've been reported on widely in the public domain, but it enables ministers to have confidence and potential private sector bidders to have confidence that the projects which are being brought to market have been very thoroughly tested within government. Correct.
That must underpin the value for money, the very good value for money we got for the 51% of the WestConnex project.
Yes, that's right. So if we look at the findings of
Dorothy, 50% more. No, it's not at all. It might help you if you hear this.
So, for instance,
Certainly will help you.
Let the witness answer the question, please.
well, the market, we're not responsible for the management of the recent sale of 51% of the Sydney Motorway Corporation, but the successful tenderer for that is a company which is enormously experienced in looking at the risk profile associated with toll roads and the management of toll roads. And they have put a very significant amount of capital into the acquisition of that 51% stake. So clearly they have confidence in the capacity of that project to stack up from a financial point of view and from an economic point of view. We talked before about Infrastructure Australia's review of the business cases for the project, first in 2015 and then in 2016. Infrastructure Australia has no axe to grind. It's not part of the political processes here. It's a Commonwealth body which is independent of government and is staffed by experts from around the country, people from Western Australia, people from Victoria and so on. And they have found that the benefit cost ratios 1.7, 1.8 were under any feasible sensitivity test or scenario so positive in terms of the benefits outweighing the costs. The costs of the project are real, they're financial costs, but there are also costs in terms of impacts on the community, and those are really important and need to be taken into consideration, not least through the planning system. But the benefits outweigh the cost to such an extent that even if you were to include the costs associated with the Gateway project into the overall benefit cost calculation for WestConnex, it would still come out with a benefit cost ratio significantly greater than 1, which means that the community is a net beneficiary from the project.
What about health costs and all the other costs that haven't been
Yeah, so
incorporated
greenhouse
in the
gas
CPR?
emissions, accident savings, they're all factored into the BCI.
Government questions, please.
You want Dorothy Dixon? I'll give you some more. The BCR process. Do you want to outline how that is actually what that involves?
Yeah, sure. So the benefits associated with major projects are, well, first of all, let's start with the cost side of the equation. So we would make sure that the construction costs and the operating and maintenance costs associated with any new asset which is subject to the business case are quantified, that those are reviewed by experts like quantity surveyors and so on, and that full risk assessments take place on the cost. And we have what we call a P50, P90 probabilistic methodology, which looks at the different risks associated with the project, and we make sure that we're taking a reasonably conservative assessment of what the cost of the project is, and then that's set out in the business case.
And that informs the contingency allowance as well, doesn't it?
Government question time.
The more rigorous the upfront risk assessment, the less the requirement for contingency, yes. So there is a relationship between the two, you're right. We would then look at the benefit side of the equation.
Just a point of clarification, that's the end of the costs. You just said capital, just point of clarification.
I'm talking about I'm talking about the direct financial costs associated with the cost side of the equation. I'll come on to the benefit side.
Direct benefits as well.
The benefit side of the equation includes the reduction in what we call externalities or external costs associated with the project.
Costs.
Because it's a benefit to reduce things like greenhouse gas emissions. It's quantified as a benefit.
Point of order.
So if we save lives as a result of road safety improvements, is that not a benefit of a project? And should that not be quantified and weighed in the balance against the costs of delivering that project? This is standardised methodology. We didn't make this up. This has been going around for decades in Western governments and elsewhere around the world. So we would look, for instance, on the benefit side of the equation of WestConnex. at the reliability benefits in terms of the ability to make journeys with a more predictable journey time through the additional capacity and the avoidance of traffic lights, for instance. We would look at the reductions in vehicle operating costs, people who are driving cars or driving trucks and the businesses that might own those trucks, whether they're light vehicles or heavy vehicles. We look at travel time savings, the ability to get from A to B quicker. We look at reductions in terms of accidents on the road network and the terrible toll that imposes in terms of injury and death. We look at the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions that comes from avoiding congestion where cars are basically idling with their engines running, pumping carbon into the atmosphere. We look at other environmental externalities, as they're called, and those are quantified, they're tested, they are the subject of rigorous reviews, they are put into environmental impact statements and are run through the statutory planning process in accordance with the requirements stipulated by the Parliament, and then a planning decision is made independently by the Planning Minister at the back end. So the benefit cost equation looks comprehensively at the costs of a project, which are largely financial, and at the benefits of a project, some of which are financial, but many of which are economic or social or environmental benefits.
Are the BCRs reviewed, monitored in the life of the project? I imagine it might come up in the assurance health checks.
Yes, so if there is a material change in the cost of a project, then that would be certainly reported to government. If that occurs before the project is committed, then the government has the opportunity to reopen the investment decision and, for instance, invite Infrastructure New South Wales in to review the numbers. But we also undertake what we call Gate 6 reviews at the back end of a project, which is where we would go back and look at whether projects have actually delivered the benefits.
That's the benefit realisation plan you're referring to, Mr. Betts?
Yeah, that's right.
What about the cost of property acquisitions? Why isn't that included in the
sorry,
cost?
I should have made that clear.
Questions.
That is included.
I would have thought it would be included.
Yes, it is.
So how do you respond to those who are saying that the BCR for WestConnex is overstated? And that could, like Sydney is one person who's saying that.
It's a bit hard to respond to that other than to say that on the relatively conservative assumptions which are made in the updated business case, the benefit cost ratio is 1.7. Now for projects across the board, that's a pretty strong benefit cost ratio. So even if you make much more conservative assumptions about the cost, even if you make much more conservative assumptions about the likely benefit stream, you've still got a net benefit to the taxpayer which is quantified at 8.7 billion. So the margin between net benefits and net costs in net present value terms is 8.7 billion. So you could be a lot more conservative and you'd still have a benefit cost ratio of greater than 1.
Okay. Stepping back, the Infrastructure New South Wales, you do state infrastructure strategy every 5 years, although I think it's less than that. We've seen from your evidence. How did governments before this government make infrastructure decisions, and did they do that type of work around cost-benefit ratios and so forth?
Well, they may have done some analysis around cost-benefit ratios. I'm sure they would have done. It wasn't invented in 2011. But what was created in 2011 was an independent infrastructure body like ourselves to provide independent advice to government. The investor assurance framework with all the external gateway reviews which we've described. The Restart New South Wales Fund, which ring-fences proceeds from asset sales so that they can only be used for infrastructure projects and can only be used for infrastructure projects with a benefit cost ratio demonstrated to the satisfaction of my independent board to be greater than 1. These are new aspects of project governance in New South Wales which have not been there previously, and I would argue are best practice anywhere in the world. And I think that that's also reflected in the fact that governments in Western Australia and South Australia and in New Zealand are setting up equivalent bodies at the moment, and they are looking at New South Wales as being the model that they're keen to follow.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr.
Okay, that will bring us to the conclusion of our question time. We thank you very much for your attendance, information you have provided. Any questions on notice? I'm not sure whether you had many on notice.
There's a few documents
If there are some, anyhow, they'll be forwarded to you by the Secretariat, and then you have 21 days from the time you receive those copies of questions to advise the answers.
Okay.
So thank you again.
Thank you, Chair.
And it's certainly a lot of minute, detailed work you're involved in.
Yes.
You obviously must enjoy it or you wouldn't be doing it. So we thank you for being with us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
How will